Um, let's talk about. Oh, we have Lemon Llama here. Nice, perfect. Welcome, sir. So, yeah, I have absolutely nothing prepared, but I feel confident about the topic of the stream. So today we're going to talk about how to improve in chess. One of the most common questions, also one of the most important questions um, in chess, in life, in any mastery or any craftsmanship that you want to master or anything. Boom. What's what's the sense of life? No, okay. So that the point is how to improve in chess. We're gonna cover from beginner to intermediate. That's the goal for today. And I have absolutely nothing prepared, but I feel confident about being able to handle this topic. And this topic was proposed yesterday by Lemon Lama. Can I call you Lemon? I'll call you Lemon because when life gives you lemons. No, Lemon subscribed yesterday, and any subscriber has this perk where you can propose a topic for the stream, and I thought that was a very nice proposal. So right immediately, next day, I'm doing this. All right. So hopefully, and that's one of the reasons I'm not putting music today, is I want this to be uncut and not muted, because hopefully what we share here today is going to be useful for many people. Hopefully. Um, you know me, some of you. You've been following me for a long time, and well, I'm an experienced player. Maybe um, I've been playing for 15 years, sort of. And I've played a lot. I've played a lot. So yeah, experience I have. I'm definitely not as experienced as title players and people that are much stronger than me, but I'm somewhere in the middle of the learning path. So again I have certain confidence to address this topic because I'm way past that, right? Also, I've been teaching a lot of chess, so um, yeah, hopefully I can share a lot of stuff today. That's the goal. Noah Viking has pen and paper already. Okay. So first of all, before I start, where to start? That's a good question. I have a couple of ideas where to start. So I'm gonna lead with that, I think. But even before I do that, um, please, anyone in the chat, feel free to share both your level goals in chess or particular challenges that you have with chess, and also feel free to ask absolutely any questions. Hey Cesar, what's up? And Benjo says d4, for example. D4 is one way to start. Yeah. Should I bring an analysis board? I have absolutely no material prepared today, but hopefully we will be able to talk about chess and learning. Those are the two topics, right? Um, so the first thing that I want to tell about improving in chess, uh, and I think this goes with improving anything in life, it depends a lot on your level. You will have different challenges, different learning challenges, depending on your level, and that's obvious, right? Everybody understands this. Now, what people usually think about learning in a linear way, where they think, okay, if you're at this level, you have the next step. The next challenge is the next step to get to the next level, and so on, right? So you're at some level, you will face certain challenges for your level, and that's a way of thinking that's, in my opinion, it's too linear. I don't think about learning that way. So how let me see if I can put this into words the way I want to explain it. I think of it more like a curve. And now let me, because the camera is reversed, I'm seeing myself reversed, but I think the curve should be like this. That is, you don't learn linearly. You face different challenges, and so the more you're at the top, actually the hardest it is to learn. Yeah, there is a learning curve. So what I mean is, imagine for a second. Let's start with this. Imagine for a second, you know of everything that's to know about chess. You know 99%. So we're talking maybe about a 2700 player. Okay, think for a second. Let's put ourselves in the shoes of Spanish number one Paco Vallejo, or uh, that's the example I have at hand. But many 2700s that nowadays are very close to the top in the world. They're just not top in the world. So they know, let's say, 99% of what's to know in chess. They've been working their whole lives in chess. They have more experience than all of us have together. They competed along a lot. They know the ins and outs of competition, psychology, every kind of chess position, every kind of chess opening, all the tactics. They have all the calculation skills, the mind process. They have everything. They're just at that point where there's someone right above them, and that someone maybe Hikaru, Carlsen, all the top players. They're just one step ahead of them, but consistently. So imagine for a second being in that situation where you've basically spent your whole life devoted to something, and you're just one step behind. That's the biggest learning challenge. That's the biggest improvement challenge. And that's these guys, that's what they have to live with. And some of them, they probably don't sleep at night thinking, how am I going to solve that problem? How am I going to improve when I've tried everything, I've done everything, and I'm just one step behind, right? That's thankfully not the challenge we're facing as beginners. Even I don't face that challenge, right? So that's like the hardest challenge in learning, is when you know a lot already and you don't know what else to do to improve. That's something that will not happen to us, to any of us, fortunately. Now, let's talk about a beginner, because we're right on the other end of the learning curve, and you have everything to learn. Let's say you know 1% and you have 99% to learn. So you know 1%. You've been taught the rules of chess. Can we define beginner and intermediate by rating? That's a good question. I would like to define, excuse me, beginner in terms of experience, in terms of how to say it. It's definitions are always the trickiest part of things. I want to think of a beginner as someone with not a lot of experience. For example, you've been playing chess for a couple months. I think that's particularly the case of Lemon. I'm not 100% sure, but I think he said, or she, I think they said a couple months. And that would qualify as a beginner to me. Couple months playing chess, maybe a year playing chess can be also a beginner. Okay. Um, Maybe a year playing chess can also be a beginner. Maybe a couple years playing chess if you're not too serious about it and you play it casually. Some people may have been playing chess regularly for the whole life, like, I don't know, over a 20-year, 30-year span, but never been too serious about it, and they may still be considered beginners because they play casually. They never invested effort in learning or studying beyond beyond that. They just want to play a game here for fun and there. So uh, rating, that's one way to measure it, yes, but rating measures performance, not quite strength. But it is true that it correlates with strength. So I don't know, what should we call a beginner? In most play zones, you start with 1500. But then I don't know if if you're really a beginner, that will probably drop down uh, to, I don't know, 1200, or I don't know how to call how to define beginner, intermediate in terms of rating. Um, if we talk about FIDE rating, I would like to think of intermediate as someone, let's say, around 1700 to 1900. That would be intermediate to me. And let's say beginner is below that. But I don't know. Do you agree with that? Or do you have another idea? Um, I don't want to do a very hard definition on this because, everybody's on specific point in the learning path, and it's not important if you're right two steps before being intermediate, or if it's not important where the border is between beginner and intermediate. I think there's no hard um, frontier there. But yeah, interesting question to try and define that. um, Played 40 years, top rating lead chess is 2050. That seems experienced to me. That seems, I would say that's probably more than intermediate. um, Maybe intermediate slash uh, what's the next level to intermediate? I think club level player I would call some 2000. There's a large gray area between intermediate and beginner. Yeah, yeah, because I don't know, of course. Imagine being on top of the world, imagine being on the top of the Everest, and you think everything's below you. It's like, how do you compare two different levels of below? So if you ask Carlsen will say, oh yeah, a guy who's been playing for 2 months, yeah, beginner. Oh yeah, someone has been playing for 2 years, yeah, beginner. He will look at me, I don't know, 2100 FIDE, and he would say, ah yeah, beginner. Like, yeah, come on. But of course it's very different. And we can have many different gray scales there, many different levels of beginner. So yeah, that's already a very important point to define, because obviously we can go um, too detailed about which point specifically you're at, and if you're serious about your improvement. Uh, that's definitely something you need to consider, is where am I in the learning path, what are my next steps. But let me put one rule clear before we start. I'm gonna say like 100 things before we start, and then I'm gonna end the stream because then that will be the content of today's session. But no, seriously, before we start, I want to put one rule clear, one guideline, because I'm a simple man. I like simple rules in life, and you can tell that from my Twitch rules. If you see the chat rules, I have just one rule. It's be nice. That's the one guideline, and I don't define what's nice. If something doesn't look nice to me, maybe I time out someone, or maybe I ban someone. It's open to interpretation. That's what happens when you have simple rules. But at the same time, simple rules are simple and easy to understand, right? So my simple rule for chess improvement is everybody is different, and there's no one single learning path. So there's no silver bullet. There's no schedule that will work for everybody. There's like, I can't come up with a plan and I'm gonna tell you this is the plan you should follow. You should do this kind of puzzles. Then tomorrow you should do this. Then you should play this amount of games with these time controls, and you should analyze this, and you should read this book. And no, I can't make a plan that will work for everybody. Everybody is different. And the good news for beginners, especially the most beginner you are, when you're at the beginning, when you're at the starting point, you have everything to learn. So the question about should I do this or should I do that, the answer is yes. The answer is yes. Try everything. Do whatever gives you more joy, because you're at that point when you start learning, you're at that point where every direction you walk, you're gonna learn. So yes, should I do this? Should I do that? Should I do the other thing? Yes, you should do everything. You should try everything. Um, so when you're uh, in a very beginner state, everything you do will teach you something. Like playing games, that's probably what people enjoy the most. So I would say yes, play games. Some people will ask, but maybe I shouldn't. I read, I heard, I shouldn't play Bullet. Yeah, probably. but but okay, I mean, if that's what you in your life, because I don't know, maybe you work a lot of hours, maybe for whatever reason, it's whatever you can afford to do. Well, then do it. It's gonna teach you something. A different topic is whether you, if you learn and you learn and you learn and you start arriving at other points where you start having learning challenges, when you start having this problem of I'm kind of in a plateau where I feel like I'm not improving. That's a moment where you should start trying new things, right? But at the beginning, no, try everything and you're gonna learn for sure. uh, we have someone with a random question. Is learning openings good for beginners, or is it better to learn just play chess? Okay, so that's right on point. That's right on point. So when you're a beginner, let's say, let's skip the first weeks of playing chess. Let's assume you already have been playing chess for a few weeks or months, and so you know the rules, including en passant, including castle, and all those things. So you know the rules of chess, and you probably know a bit about everything. You probably know a bit about openings. You probably know this thing called the opening, this thing called the middle game, this thing called the end game, and I don't know. You know about the draw rules, the 50 moves rule, the threefold repetition. You probably know a lot of things about chess. But what's the next step? How do you improve your game? Should I study openings? Of course, each part of chess, each aspect of chess can be worked differently. So, for example, if I want to work openings, openings is about studying. It's about theory. It's about uh, studying a lot that will never happen, right? Because opening is exponential. So when you study openings, you're investing a lot of time learning a lot of things that will never happen over the board. You're studying a lot of things just in case they happen. But that's what openings are about. It's about uh, committing to memory things that then will help you over the board, because then you know them. You don't need to figure them out. You know them, right? And the same happens to endgames. The same happens on the other end. Um, one thing, one metaphor that I actually enjoyed coming up with. I participated last year, on a podcast. They were developers. They were not chess players, but we were talking about chess and code. So they wanted me to explain chess for developers, and I came up with this metaphor of a chess game as a maze with a Z, like a labyrinth, where um, you can explore the paths from the starting point and even from the exit point, and you can explore that and study that and then use that knowledge. But the center of the maze is always a mess. It's always complicated, and you can never tell how to get to that end game you want, right? To that exit you want. So, and I think that's not a bad metaphor, because that's what it is to study chess from a theoretical point of view. Is you study openings, you study endgames. You cannot study middle games. I mean, you can study features of middle games. You can study pawn structures. You can study tactics. Definitely, tactics is the most important thing. But yeah, when you study openings, it's about studying a lot of things, committing a lot of things to memory that will never happen. So therefore, of all the things you can study in chess, it's one of the least valuable openings. Now, people love studying openings for some random reason. I don't know what it is that people feel so attracted about. I think it is this thing about winning games in 10 moves, if possible. But I tell you what, if you're winning games in 10 moves, you're doing it wrong. You're not learning chess for sure. You're probably not playing the right opponents, right? So chess is not about winning the game out of the blue in the opening. So, trying to answer the question now. Is learning openings good for beginners? I don't think it's advisable. I don't think it's the best thing you could do as a beginner. But again, rule number one, learning is not a single path. Everybody's different. And some people do really enjoy studying openings. And as I said before, when you're a beginner, you're in a position where everything you do will teach you something. So even studying openings will teach you something. So if it's what floats your boat, yeah, sure, do it. But very likely you will start losing games because of reasons that have absolutely nothing to do with the opening. So it's very likely that even if you focus your efforts on learning openings, there will be some point where you will feel that you need to look into other things, into other aspects of chess. Lemon asks, should you learn? Well, Robert California has a good point. Gold don't lose the game in 10 moves. So yeah, that's one thing that people use as an argument about studying openings. So I don't know, what opening trick do we know? The simplest one is the Scholar's Mate, probably, where white actually plays bad moves to try to checkmate black. So white plays this bad idea of bringing the queen out early in the opening, which is a bad idea. But then if black is careless, then we checkmate black, yay, and we win the game. Now, did you see in the Masters database anyone ever playing knight f6 here? No. If we look at the Masters database, which by the way I have it opened here, and you see this position, well, nobody will hang the mate if they're strong enough. And actually, black scores pretty well here, because who plays queen h5? Queen h5 is such a stupid move. So people think, yeah, I should study openings not to hang the tricks. So it's good that I know the Scholar's Mate, because then I don't fall for it. Well, yes, and also no, because this is about tactics. This is about, two things attacking f7, and you not paying attention to that. So you don't need to know by memory. You don't need to. Bishop c4 is a move. Yeah, and I play bishop c4 all the time, but queen h5 is a bad move. But the point is, the more you look into openings, I look at. Let me put it this way: I see studying openings or looking into openings as a discovery tool. To me, it's a discovery tool up to a certain level, and I would say, of course, it's. I don't want to give a hard number, so I don't want to say 1800 or 2000 or 2200, but somewhere around there. So let's say 2000, because it's a number that many people use for these things. So let's say 2000. Let's say up to 2000, you should look into openings as a discovery tool, as a tool to discover new ideas that you can bring into your own opening repertoire or into just your own play, into your own gameplay, but not as something that you should take too seriously, because again, it's not worth the effort most of the time. Like, you study a lot of things that then will never happen. And what's worse? The worst part is not when you study a lot of things that will never happen over the board. The worst is when they actually happen and you don't remember them. And that happened to me. I'm already at a level where I study openings more or less seriously, and I've been studying openings seriously for a few years now. And sometimes it happens that a position appears over the board on a game, and I think, oh yes, I studied this. like 3 years ago. I don't remember it. Like what? It's double waste. It's I studied something, and it's not only the waste that it never happens. It's also the ways that when it happens, time went by and I don't remember what I studied. So what was useful about studying it? Like it's the worst. So yeah, studying openings is a big commitment. It's a lot of things that you need to have to put there in your long-term memory, and then if you're serious about competition, you need to keep reviewing them, so you know that you will be able to recall them when you need them. So definitely not an aspect of the game that I would recommend to anyone that's not, let's say, like too serious about the game. Um, so now addressing Lemon's question, should you learn a lot of openings or just stick to one or two? I think there's no wrong answer there. Uh, I think most people, what they do is to stick to one or two. I think that's the normal path because when you play chess, you don't want to focus too much on the opening, and that's good. So, maybe you just play whatever you know how to play, and then you take it from there. And then there's a lot that happens. Every game is different, so there's a lot of tactics, there's a lot of things, a lot of problems that you solve when you play chess, including end games, hopefully. And so you keep playing the same opening because you keep getting different games every time, and that's fine. So I don't think there's any particular advantage of um, using many openings or only a few. um, Again, in my opinion, learning openings is more of a discovery tool. So if you feel like exploring many of them, I think that's good. That will open your mind. Um, but maybe you will lose focus in other aspects of the game if you focus too much on that. If you focus too much on exploring openings. So I'm a lover of exploring openings, right? And I think for everybody who aspires to be an experienced chess player, you will need to explore a lot of openings and understand many different types of positions instead of sticking to the same over and over. But I don't think that's important when you're a beginner. I think when you're a beginner, you're hanging your pieces, so you should fix that first. so yeah, it's not super important that you stick just to one or two. And for example, in my case, if I tell you my own story, when I started playing chess, I started like everybody playing the Italian, or playing e4, playing e5 as black against e4, and we would have all these symmetrical Italian slash Ruy Lopez structures, usually Italian because that's what beginners play with the bishop on c4, not on b5, and because both players tend to do the same, the positions tend to be very symmetrical, very boring. Nowadays, I look at them as something very boring. But at that point, it was like, yeah, I'm playing chess. I'm developing my pieces. Look at me. And then both players would go on to start blundering our pieces, and I would learn some tactics. But and then, because I've always been aggressive, I started looking into gambits. So I started looking into the Scotch gambit, which was very natural when you start playing the Italian. So let me put some moves on the board because maybe I'm talking about things that you don't know. So the Italian is, of course, when you develop the most played opening, right? E4, E5, then you bring the knight out, attacking the undefended pawn, and black brings the knight out, defending the pawn, and now bishop c4. What's more natural than trying to checkmate black on f7? And this is the Italian, right? And then there's the Scotch, which is d4, and after they take, instead of taking back, which is the main line of the Scotch, you play bishop c4 now. That's called the Scotch gambit. So you start looking into these kind of gambits, and there are many gambits, many in chess. There are incredibly tons of gambits, and if you start learning openings, um, gambits are very appealing, right? because they're very spectacular, and because you don't know a lot of about chess, you start seeing spectacular things, and that's good. That's good because that's to me it was very enjoyable to start looking into gambits when I started learning chess. So yeah, as a beginner, I'm not saying again rule number one. There's no unique path, and maybe whatever floats your boat is something different. Some players find d4 more enjoyable. So whatever floats your boat. But yeah, for me, as for I think many players, I started looking into gambits at the beginning a lot. And as white, I would play e4 and try to go for the kill. And I started sacrificing things without even knowing the names of. So, for example, I started playing things like the Danish gambit without even knowing it was called the Danish Gambit. So these kind of things, I started doing them like on my own, like naturally, like without even studying theory, just because it felt natural to do, and a good way to discover things about how initiative works in the opening. And as black, I would start playing things like the Budapest Gambit. That was one of my first openings as black, the so-called Budapest Gambit, which is pretty interesting. I don't know if I want to go too deep into openings today, but maybe we can show some lines that could potentially be interesting for beginners. And and in that line, if I had to recommend openings for beginners, okay, and this is going to be totally opinionated because um, every coach has a different opinion on this. Okay, so so again, bear with me. This is just me. If I had to recommend openings for beginners, if I had, okay, so things clear about that. You're completely free to play any opening you want, and you'll be fine. You'll be fine. You will learn chess. No, you don't need to listen to my recommendations. But um, there are openings in chess that are easier and openings that are more difficult, and that doesn't mean that you should necessarily aim for the easier when you're a beginner, because let's be honest, you're a beginner, you will lose, you will hang your pieces regardless of whether you're playing a super mainline theory or a super offbeat opening. It doesn't really matter. so so let's be clear about that. However, um, in the long term, if you aspire to build a repertoire, an opening repertoire, and maybe we're talking, in the range from beginner to intermediate, maybe this would make more sense when you're close to intermediate, when you're already a bit experienced, okay? And and you want to start building a repertoire, like an opening repertoire, like I play this, I play the Scandinavian defense, I'm a French defense player, or I'm a Scotch whatever. Um, so players end up building a repertoire because it's natural. It's natural that players stick to the same openings over time. Now, if you want to start building a repertoire over time, I would say my recommendation is to go for more concrete lines first, because then the study will be easier. And what do I mean by concrete lines first? Let's put an example. If you play 1e4, let's look it from the black's perspective because it's going to be easier if we take a defense from black. Now, what do you do against e4? Those of you in the chat, um, especially those of you who are beginners, what do you do against 1e4? I'm pretty sure you know that masters play especially a lot e5 and c5. And I see in the chat e5, I see d5, I see c6. Hey, Paradach. So, and Paradach says c5. Okay, so when you learn chess over time, over years, there are two things that you keep doing. You're learning and putting into practice into your own chess, and you build your own repertoire, but at the same time you learn about chess in general and what people play. So you get this general knowledge that, oh yeah, grandmasters play e5, grandmasters play c5, those are the best moves, right? The Sicilian defense, which is like the most combative, and e5, which is like the most symmetrical. So grandmasters, they know a lot of theory, so games tend to be very drawish in e4 e5 compared to e4 c5, for example. Hello, Sleepy. So you start learning all those things, but at the same time you need to build your own repertoire. And so some players will start with e5, most people do, and some will switch over to c5, and some others will play other things that we're seeing in the chat, like d5 or c6. So we have the Scandinavian d5, we have the Caro-Kann c6, we have the French defense with d6. I'm Vlad. Hey, thanks for the follow. We have d6, g6, knight f6, knight c6. We have lots of things. The Scandi, yes, d5. So what do I mean by concrete opening? When I talk about concrete openings or defenses, I'm referring to those openings that are like too direct. And by direct, let's put an example. You just played e4. White just played one e4, which is putting a pawn in the center of the board, but that pawn is undefended, right? So if we attack that pawn, if we target that pawn, that's like the most direct approach. If we target that pawn, uh, we're not giving white a lot of options. Let's put it that way. So that means what I'm referring to specifically is the Scandi, for example, which basically attacks that pawn already, right? Or the Alekhine defense that attacks the pawn as well. These direct approaches, they're not the best, okay? Like objectively, and you don't see grandmasters playing this. Um, or if they do it very rarely in a blitz game or something, like as a surprise weapon. Why? Because it's a very direct approach. Uh, that means that white doesn't have a lot of options, and therefore the opening theory for this specific opening is much narrower than in other options, right? Because if you play knight f6, you attack the pawn. White can't just play any move. White can't just allow knight takes e4. So white should do something about this. If you're playing a grandmaster, they will push the pawn. They will grab the free space, force you to move the knight again, which in actual fact it seems rather bad for black. But obviously white is pushing the same pawn again, so both sides are breaking some principles. But the point is, if white doesn't play e5, you're happy as black. Okay, maybe white has other options. Definitely white has other options. White can play like knight c3. White can play like d3, even though that's really ugly. If if white plays already d3, you could be happy already, blocking the bishop and everything. So yeah, knight f6 is a very direct approach, and it doesn't give a lot of options to white. White 9 times out of 10 will play e5. The same goes with d5. White should not allow d takes e4, although some people play the Staunton gambit. The Black Dimmer gambit with d4. But that's also very concrete. My point is, if you're direct in your approach, the options are much more limited for your opponent. That is not something that I'm using to justify the opening as a good opening, and I'm limiting my opponent's options. No. That doesn't mean it's a good thing, because those options may be good. They're actually good. What I mean by you're limiting your opponent's options is you have less to study. That's the advantage I'm saying these openings have compared to others. That if you ever decide to start studying openings, these openings will require less study than others, because the lines will be very forcing. And you can tell already from the database. You will see everybody playing e takes d5 here. There's no color here. 22,000 games versus 500 games. Everybody will take the pawn, and that's already Um, I mean, I'm not claiming this is a good defense for black, but again, we're talking about beginners. We're talking about the moment where the game is not going to be decided for whether you're playing the best or the worst opening line. They will be decided later when you hang your pieces. But if you start studying openings, this will be much easier to study because the opening it's super forcing, and the pawn structure, the resulting pawn structure is always going to be the same. Compare that, for example, to the Caro-Kann, where you try to prepare d5, right? So you can take back with a pawn, which makes a lot more sense than the Scandi, by the way. So the Scandi is an attempt of liquidating the center that has the drawback, as many of you know, of bringing the queen out too early in the opening. That's the drawback, and they will target the queen. You will have to move the queen again, and you're going to be a little bit behind in development, and eventually a little bit behind in space. So it's not the best defense, but it's super easy to study. Okay, because you're always gonna get the same. You're always gonna get the same kind of pawn structure. You will always gonna have to face the same problems, and they're not the prettiest problems, but they're not so bad. so so you will have to study less than if, for example, you decide, no, I'm gonna play something better. I'm gonna play c6, which is the Caro-Kann, because I want to prepare the move d5, so that I can take back with the pawn, and I don't need to bring my queen out of the opening. But then you face the problem of giving your opponent more options, which is bad in terms of amount of things you have to study, right? Because now you have to study or know things about many different pawn structures that can arise from this position, because your opponent is not forced to take now on d5. Your opponent may decide to defend, and then eventually you may take, and you have one type of pawn structure. A different pawn structure may arise when they take, because you want to take back with the pawn. A different pawn structure may arise when they decide to push, and so on. So you have different pawn structures, you have different lines, different things to bear in mind. Now, it's not a problem. You can, of course, study, but I'm saying being it less concrete, giving more options to your opponent will make the study a bit more complicated in terms of different things, different paths you have to look into. So I think that's all. I don't want to say much more about openings, especially because we're talking about beginners. But that's one thing to consider. That maybe you want to go for straight approach openings, or for example against d4. Since everybody follows up with c4 pretty much. Like, against d5 the main move is c4, against knight f6 the main move is c4, and maybe it's not a bad idea to consider something like the Budapest Gambit. Again, I'm not saying you should play this blah blah blah. I'm not saying this is the way you should play. This is my recommendation, because I think everybody's different, and try different things and whatever you like. Some people like studying opening theory, some people don't. But if you don't, or if you want to do it in a slow pace, like, right now I'm too beginner, I'm not going to study openings, I will just play my two openings I know, and that's it. And maybe in 1 year from now, maybe I study, or I start studying openings. Well, what I'm saying is certain openings are more direct. They will be easier to study. And for example, the Budapest Gambit is one of those. It may not be the best, but it's fun. It's sharp, a little bit sharp. I mean, not too sharp, but it's fun. It's a bit tactical. There's some tactics, and it's very direct. So that's the good news. You only have to study like 3 different lines. And I remember, um, I have a friend who's an FM, um, and he was like, "Oh, the Budapest Gambit, that will never work against my students, because that's like the easiest thing to study. So all of my students know how to play against the Budapest Gambit." And I'm like, "Yeah, they know how to play. but you still get a playable position, right? And he's like, yeah, true. So that's the thing. Regardless whether you're black or white, that's the thing about the Budapest Gambit. There are three lines. There are three things you need to know. So it's not the most complicated to study. That means that at some point in your learning path, you may probably, if you play it, you may probably want to stop playing it and start playing other things that will give you more winning chances. Because if your opponent is prepared, you're not gonna catch them with this. But at the same time, again, yeah, that's the um, what's the word in English? The trade-off between studying a lot or trying to play something more correct or whatever. So that's all I have to say, I think, about openings. Now let me catch up with the chat. Paradise says, I started with e5 when I was a beginner. Yeah. Then I switched immediately to c5, and since that I've played Scandi as a second option, but last year or more French has been my second option. Interesting, yeah, and as you see players getting stronger and stronger, you'll see repertoires getting wider and wider. And if we look into my database, it's going to be just stupid the amount of things I play, right? If I look into player, this is me as white. And I think I played every legal move, every possible legal move on move one. And if we look at me as black against e4, let's say, yeah, you see, this is because of bullet. I play a lot of knight f6 and d5, but you see a lot of e5, a lot of e6, c5, g6, d6, b6, c6, f6, f6, h5, knight a6, f5, knight c6, a6, g5, a5, even b5, even 8 games I won with b5. Wow, h6 and knight h6. I think I tried every legal move, and okay, obviously I don't play them often, but some of them I do, more than one, and that's normal. That's normal for experienced players to play many different types of openings, because at some point, you know, uh, you start having options also as as a tool, as a strategic tool, right? When you face certain opponent and oh yeah, this guy plays like this, plays like that, so I think this line will work better against them. So at some point, but that's looking too far. That's looking already at intermediate slash advanced level, and that's not the topic for today. So yeah, my recommendation from beginner to intermediate is don't focus too much on the opening, even though you're gonna learn. So if you want to look into openings, for sure you're gonna learn things. Just use openings as a discovery tool. You will discover ideas. Don't take it too seriously, because you're gonna blunder your pieces after that anyway. So, um, Sleepy says, I started playing e5 as a beginner, but experienced a lot of issues with the f7 diagonal. Yeah, so I switched to e6 to block the bishop. To me, it was something similar, but I chose the Scandi instead of the French because I had a friend, a very good friend of mine, who's always been stronger than me, and he still is. Um, and he plays the French all the time, and I was like, that's so disgusting. Like the French defense, So I try to avoid the French. And one thing I like to do, but I'm talking already as an experienced player, okay? So this will qualify only, I think, from the point where you can be considered already an intermediate player, probably. Because every year I used to play team competition with classical time controls, and people would prepare a lot because it's always the same league, the same teams, the same players. What I would do is every year I will come up with some new opening. So I would use a year to study and renovate my opening repertoire, and then on the league I will surprise my opponents. Jake Carmody, hey, I tend to take openings too seriously and find myself confused when the opening ends. Right. Yeah, again, don't take openings too seriously. That's my advice. And the stronger you get, the more you're going to connect concepts. And now we're talking about, and this is important, I think, we're talking about how we learn in a very big, very, very big mastery, very big in terms of knowledge you have to handle. So it's something you're going to learn over years, right? You're going to learn chess over years. The same you're going to learn uh, to speak a new language over years, or the same you're going to learn how to play a music instrument. So those things take a lot of knowledge and a lot of practice. So what happens is, from, let's say, when you're a beginner or when you're intermediate, let's call intermediate, maybe another word for intermediate could be fluent, right? Let's call it fluent. When you already, when many of the processes of this mastery uh, are already second nature in your brain. They come naturally. You don't have to think um, consciously about them, because when you're a beginner, you just know the rules, and you even have to pay attention and think it through to realize what your legal moves are, for example. But for any experienced player, that's totally second nature. You don't think about it, but you just see it, right? So many things, over time, many things are going to be moving from your, let's say, conscious sphere of thinking. They will move to your memory, maybe, or wiring in your neural paths in your brain, but they will become second nature. And one funny thing about it is you're going to start connecting concepts together, concepts that now you see as completely disconnected. Like, for example, we talk about openings, we talk about endgames, or we talk about many things as a beginner that you can, should I do this or should I do that? And once you're experienced, all of it is connected. Like, when you're experienced, you don't look into uh, middle games, or when you study middle games, for example, and you study different open structure, different pawn structures, uh, you totally connect them with the openings you play. Or when you study um, tactics, or maybe more than tactics, when you study maneuvers of your pieces and different kinds of ideas for your pieces, that's very, very connected to the end games. And everything's connected in your head, and the more you master something, the more things are gonna get connected in a way that you don't even you're not even conscious about it. So again, sorry, I'm talking too much. um, but yeah, I don't want to go too deep into the opening. Just telling you that once you're intermediate, uh, it will come naturally that when you study openings, you're not just focusing on memorizing moves, but rather you're actually trying to foresee what kind of middle game you're gonna get and what are the plans in that middle game. And you're gonna connect that with the middle game more than now. Now, when you study openings, you're like, what is b6 here? I don't even know the name of that opening. Or what is e6? E6, they told me it's the French, but I don't even know how to continue after. What's happening here? I know this is the exchange, but what happens if 92? I've never seen 92 in my life. What is bishop d3, right? Or you know at, at the point you're at when you're a beginner, on move 2 you're already lost. Like, on move 2 there are already too many options, and you don't know them all. But over time, when you're experienced, that's not the same way. You're not going to study openings the same way. You're going to be way past this, and you're going to be looking at deeper lines, but you're not even going to look at them in the same way. You're not looking at them in the way of this option A, option B, option C. This is the evaluation of option B A. This is the evaluation of option B. No, 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 no. You're gonna connect that more with your knowledge. It's gonna be more connected to your knowledge and what kind of pawn structure you want, what kind of middle game plans you want, and so on. So again, different levels, you have different learning challenges. So don't think everything is going to be the same always. Good news is, again, you're at a point where you shouldn't care a lot about it. so so maybe I'm talking a lot about it and I shouldn't. Paradach says, as a beginner, I didn't focus that much on theory. I just played games and reviewed them, and over time it built up on by itself. Yeah, exactly. And that's my main recommendation. I think do whatever you like, because anything, any direction you choose to walk towards, you're gonna learn something. So some people, some weirdos will love studying openings, and they will learn. They will learn from it. But the most part, I think what people like the most is playing. And what people should do more than they don't often do is analyzing games. So good point there from Paradach. And the other thing that people sometimes neglect and shouldn't is tactics. So those are probably the two other things that I would recommend to beginners to start doing besides playing. I think playing is not something I need to recommend because all everybody likes playing. I know you're gonna play, but besides playing, the things you should be trying to do are probably puzzles and analyzing games. Yeah, definitely. Um, Sleepy says, Pepe, what's your opinion on Silman's books for amateurs? I have no idea. I haven't read those books. Lemon with a question. Do you think Capablanca's Chess Fundamentals book is good for basic understanding? I have no idea. I didn't read that book. I didn't read many chess books. And that's a problem with books in general and in chess in particular, is that um, there are too many. So so yeah. I have no idea, but what I can say about Capablanca is well, definitely it's worth looking at his games, and that's maybe another topic to talk about, because at some point in the path from beginner to intermediate, you have to look at classic games, and some of those will be from Capablanca. Like, to me, uh, at the level I am and at the level my advanced students are, and I think I can safely call them intermediate already, intermediate slash advanced. We study a lot of theoretical endgames, and I do also these sessions, these streams with theoretical endgames. Although I try to keep it, basic, so endgames that will be interesting to know theoretically for intermediate players. But I think probably working on theoretical endgames, uh, it's not that important for beginners, or maybe for beginners it's only important, let's say, king and pawn versus king, basic checkmates, of course, and things like that. But yeah, king and pawn versus king would be probably the most important, and maybe some other. Maybe if you feel like it, some rook and pawn versus rook. Maybe only certain cases. But to get to intermediate level, you don't need to know a lot about theoretical endgames. But it is very advisable that you know a lot about practical endgames, and at least concepts, endgame concepts. And for that, for example, Capablanca's games are amazing. Lots of great examples of very important concepts for endgames. And I think, in your way from beginner to intermediate, you probably want to look into endgames from that point of view, more practical, from games, trying to understand concepts about, how the activity of the king is important, how the activity is important in general in the endgames, and the king and the rooks and the pass pawns and so on, and start learning about those concepts. I think it's more important than maybe the theoretical study, although eventually you're going to have to go for the theoretical study as well. Okay, so that's all I have to say about Capablanca's chess. Even I didn't read that book, but I don't know. Probably the book is good. if it's from him. J. Carmody says I can tell you what openings I like because you have a lot of fans in the Lichess 45 league. I don't want them to see this stream and know how to prepare against me. That's by the way, a misconception I had a lot of misconceptions. I look at myself like 10 years ago when I was a beginner. I look at myself back then and I'm like, "Oh man, I was so stupid." Like I could have been much more clever about my own learning and improving, which is I think part of the reason why we're here today or what we're trying to answer, because many beginners say, "Oh yes, I know that I'm gonna improve," because what I'm saying today is anything you do, you will improve. So that's like saying nothing. People want no, give me a plan to improve in a faster way. And yes, you can be more clever about the way you learn and you can learn faster. Um, but again, I'm going to go back to rule number one, everybody is different. And I think the way to learn faster varies from person to person. So I think it's very, very, very important. The analysis, for example, that Paradach said, the self reflection about your own chess understanding and being aware of your own challenges, of your own problems, of your own the things you don't understand. There's nothing better than playing your best and losing and then analyzing, because if you play your best and you lose, there's probably something in that game that you don't understand, and if you get to understand it, you're gonna learn something, and that's gonna be very valuable. So that mindset of analysis after the game is very important, and also of course the mindset of trying to play your best, because if you make a mistake that you already understand that it's a mistake, then you don't learn anything. So yeah, don't play all those bullet games where you're gonna blunder pieces in a way that you look at them and you're like, oh yeah, I just they attacked my piece, I didn't defend it. Yeah, I understand the problem. So yeah, don't do that. Try to play your best. And if that takes playing longer time controls, well, then play longer time controls. If you really want to improve faster, that's what you should do. You should focus on playing your best so that you lose in ways that will teach you something. Okay, I'm getting behind in the chat, so let me read. Resonance Spectre says, does analyzing games mean you can have an already analyzed games and read through, or must you derive all the analysis by yourself? That's a very good question. That's a very good question. Um, so I'm gonna tell you what I tell my students. Okay. So I tell my students to analyze their games whenever they can. Uh, my advice is to analyze all the games that are long enough, long time control, to spend at least a certain amount, whatever it feels like. For me, for example, when I play a classical chess game that is 90 plus 30, 90 minutes per player and 30 seconds increment, I usually spend analyzing at least the same amount of time I spent playing the game. But that's not a rule. That's whatever feels like for everyone. Um, but a decent amount of time is necessary to analyze. And my rule, what I tell my students is, don't use an engine. Don't analyze with an engine. So first important, do your own analysis. Just do your own analysis, because that's your own understanding. Here's the thing. In the best scenario, what you're getting out of the analysis is learning, right? That's what we want. That's why we want to analyze it. Some people want to analyze because they want, like, they want to, I don't know, to see, oh, how well did I do? Let's see what the engine thinks, um, or did I miss something? Maybe. But what's really important is to learn. And if we focus in learning, and if you want to learn faster, then you should be focusing on learning. Learning would be the top priority. Then you should face your own understanding versus, I'm gonna call it the truth. You're never gonna get the truth, okay? But something closer to the truth than your own understanding. So you're facing your understanding versus the truth, and the truth is whatever an engine will tell you or whatever someone stronger than you will tell you. And again, it's not going to be the absolute truth. It's going to be something just closer to the truth than your own understanding. And by comparing those, your understanding versus that truth, you will learn. You will understand new things, right? But before you do that, you need to make your own understanding clear, because whatever you thought during the game is probably the closest you have to your own understanding, but there's still room to analyze that. So what I like to do, um, when I look at a game after I played it, is go over it, try to solve the questions I had during the game, because during the game you have questions, right? Like, uh, do I have this problem here? Should I do something about it? Should I be developing this piece or should I be prioritizing that? And all those questions you give answers during the game. And many times you just guess, right? We can't know. We don't have answers. So we calculate, we compare, we like one option more than other, then we play it. But the doubt, the question's still there after the game. So we go over that, and we ask the same questions again, we explore them again, the alternative paths, and sometimes we discover things during our analysis. Sometimes we discover things and we think, yeah, maybe this was better because of this, because of that. And you try to put words into it, you try to put words into your own thought process during the game, because during the game you're not putting words, you're just trying your best with the time you have. But after the game you can try to write down an analysis, and that's my recommendation for my students, is to write down your thought process during the game. Doesn't matter if it's right or wrong, it is your own understanding, you're putting it there so you can compare it later. And for example, now when I look at my notes that I wrote 10 years ago, they're really, really insightful about what I was thinking. And it's so different from the way I look at positions now, that it helps me understand a lot how my own thought process changed. But yeah, writing your own thoughts is very interesting, especially if you have a coach, because then you can show them that too. And and so the question was, you can have analyzed games and read through, or you must derive all the analysis by yourself. I think the more you do your own work by yourself, the better or the faster your learning will be, of course. Um, and then once you have done that analysis, then you can go to check with an engine, or even better, with some player that's stronger than you. Because an engine will give you good answers for certain things, like for concrete questions, the engine will be good. Like, if you blunder a piece, the engine will tell you. But when it comes to understanding how certain calculated lines compare to each other in strategical terms, or things that don't have a concrete answer, then a human is better. And ideally, you would analyze with your opponent, especially if your opponent is stronger than you. But sometimes you can't do that. Okay, next thing in the chat. Jake Carmody, sorry, I'm a bit behind in the chat. I know it's still about openings, but it's like you said, though. Someone may know I'm going to play the Karokan, for example, but I'll be winging it after the first 4 or 5 moves anyway, maybe sooner. Yeah. Restaurant says, up to what leeches rapid classical rating is someone a beginner, and when does he transition into an intermediate? We already talked about it. We don't have a hard line there. Yeah, I don't have a hard line. and it there's definitely a big difference between, I don't know, 1500 and 1800. There's a big difference for sure, but um, it's not everything about the rating. And also, one thing we didn't say about ratings is, um, when you're, let's say, when you're a 2800 player, okay, you're top of the world. You're good at everything, at every aspect of chess, right? So the difference between a 2800 and a 2700 is probably very hard to figure out what the difference is. There is a difference, and you can see the top player beating the other guy consistently, let's say. But you ask the 2700, and they cannot tell you what the difference is in terms of what should I do to be like the other guy, right? So in, in their, like, they both know a lot. They both know like a very lot of chess. They're very complete players. Okay. Now, if you go to the other extreme, a 1200 or a 1000, you can also compare two players in that level because they both blunder pieces left and right. Now, when you pick somewhere in the middle, let's say 1800 or 2000, you can have two players with the same rating and they can be completely different. The rating is meaningless. The rating is meaningful when you are on extreme because you know a 2800 is bloody good at everything, at every aspect of chess. And you know a 1000 or less is really bad at every aspect of chess. But somewhere in the middle, they can be great opening experts and really horrible at calculation, or they can be great endgame technicians and know nothing about openings, or they can be completely different. They can have completely different strengths that result on the same rating. uh, because yeah, when you're in one extreme and you have it all, when you're in the other extreme you have nothing. But at the middle, the number will it's really meaningless because it doesn't tell you anything about the player. They can have completely different strengths. So yeah, for me it's hard to put a line on when you stop being beginner. But yeah. um Sleepy says, in classical games, I do think in words. I actually talk to myself, ask questions, and try to answer them. Yeah, me too. Me too. That is true. But also, I have to say, since I started streaming, I do it more often, which is kind of hard. But it was funny because I'm not English. I'm not English native. I'm a Spaniard. I'm from Spain. My native languages are Galician and Spanish. So uh, when I play classical chess over the board, I use words, yeah, and I ask things to myself about my pieces. Like I talk to my pieces, like Yasser Serouan would say, like why is this knight so sad in this square and things like that. And yeah, I think in words. But after I started streaming a lot in English, I started seeing myself during over the board chess games thinking in words in English, which was kind of shocking to me. But yeah, it happens. The more you and uh, and I think it's good. I think it's good. I think it's a good thing that you think in words. I'm not saying that you should do it, but if it happens naturally, I think it's a good thing because that means that you're probably taking care of your thoughts, and um, and eventually you're going to incorporate into your own games those same mental process that you use during the analysis of your games, which is trying to put into words what's happening. I think it's a very old idea, Lasker, which was later reiterated by Dvoretsky. I mean, talking. Aha. I also think more in English than in my native language when I play chess. Okay, and we have DC7221 asking, is it how deep they calculate? Let's talk about calculation, which we didn't talk about. We talked a lot about openings, which I don't like because again, beginners don't focus on openings. But let's talk about calculation. When you're a beginner, you hang pieces like very easily, and that's already a problem. So you see things like, I don't know, let's play d4. You see things like this. You see things like I don't know, let's say c6. Actually, let's play Trompowsky. In beginner level, you see things like this, like e4, like e3, sorry, which is a blunder, right? Any beginner in the chat can tell me why e3 is a blunder here. Queen check, very well, J. Carmody. Queen check, queen fork on a5, very nice, Nugans. Okay, so we have a fork. We have a fork. So you can see this at beginner level. You can see a move that like e3, right? And and you can see it for a number of reasons. I mean, you can explain this blunder in a number of ways, and probably there's no single answer. But e3 is a natural move. First of all, it's a move that you study opening theory, you study different lines, and you will see e3 included at some point in many positions that start with d4 and bringing the bishop out. Then e3 is a natural move at some point. But here it has a very clear tactical problem. And I remember Ben Feingold has some rules, and I like Ben Feingold's rules. And he has some lessons about tactics and tactics that beginners miss a lot. And he talks a lot about undefended pieces on the third and fourth rank, undefended pieces on the middle of the board. When you have an undefended piece, be mindful of that, right? If you're a beginner, so that's two conditions. If you're a beginner and you have an undefended piece in the middle of the board, be mindful of that because there may be some tactic against it, like in this example. And the funny part about e3 is e3 is the only move that prevents the bishop from going back to d2. So any other move in the position that allows queen a5 check with a fork to the bishop, no problem. The bishop can block the check. But e3 is the blunder. E3 is the and that's another way to explain this blunder is there is a problem, or so the move e3 creates a problem that was not there before. So you didn't see it because the problem was not there until you made your move, which is something that happens to beginners a lot. That there's no problem, and you make a move that creates a problem. But because the problem was not there, you didn't see it. So yeah, and there are many different aspects to work on when you're a beginner. Now, Ben Feingold's rules, simple rules, can help you put the focus on the right things so you prevent accidents. But in the end, these accidents will happen and you will learn from them. so I'm sorry. Sometimes learning the hard way is the fast way. So if you blunder a piece, that's fine. Just try to pay attention. Why did you blunder it? And then I go back to what we were talking about, analysis, which I think is very important for especially for beginners, is to verbalize your thoughts and try to answer the questions. When you blunder, try to ask it to answer the question, why did I blunder? And sometimes it's, oh, I'd never seen this opening before. I fell for a trick. Okay, that's fine. Maybe it was hard to find the trick. In this case, for example, if I was white and I played e3, even if I was a beginner, I wouldn't think that. I wouldn't think, oh, I fell for a trick. I would think, well, I didn't pay attention because I honestly know what a fork is. I honestly know what an undefended piece is. And I think I honestly, if I'm given the black side of this position and I'm told black to play and win, I would find queen a5. So it's about paying attention, probably. Or maybe about that other rule that many beginners are given: when you see a move, spend a minute thinking about whether that move has a problem. Because, yeah, again, we're talking about what we said earlier about second nature. When you're a beginner, most things you have to think them through, in a conscious level. When you're more experienced, you see these things, like you see them, you don't need to think about them, you just see them. So when you're experienced, you see this kind of fork like immediately, you don't think about it, you just see it. And whenever, if someone plays e3, I'll see it. But when you're a beginner, you need to think it through because you don't see these things like on the spot. So yeah, that rule, I think it's a good one for beginners, is whenever you think about your move, spend time thinking about it. What could possibly be the problem? Now, I'm telling you, the problem will be either on problems that you already have in the position, like undefended pieces. And in this instance, because you played bishop g5, which is playable, okay, it's the Trompowsky opening, but whenever you bring a bishop out, you're undefending the pawn that the bishop was defending, so b2 is undefended. And also in this case, the bishop is undefended. So an experienced player keeps track in their minds of things that are undefended, on, let's call them, weaknesses. An experienced player not only keeps track of the material count and things like that, but also keeps track of weak points, threats. You keep track of them. You do. So uh, when you look at this position as a beginner, you see pieces on the board randomly. And if you need to think about legal moves, uh, you will explore all the options you have. But an experienced player looks at the board and sees an undefended bishop on g5, an undefended pawn on b2, and things like that. Your way of looking at the position is different. Um, and so as a beginner, when you think, I want to play e3, what could possibly be the problem? You need to think about two things. One, problems that you already had in the position, and for example, undefended things could be problems. And two, anything you're adding to that with your move. So with the move e3, what are you blocking? Yeah, and that's it, right? So sometimes you will make a move that will stop defending something. Sometimes you will make a move that will block something. Sometimes you'll make a move that will open a line that your opponent can use. So just focus on your last move, because it, or the move you're considering, and what creates on the board. But also remember those problems you already have, which is, by the way, a common problem that beginners have, or even intermediate problems. They have this problem a lot. They don't care a lot about creating problems on their position, like having a lot of undefended things. And that's a mess, because honestly, when I have, sometimes you can get away with having a lot of weak points or undefended pieces, but it takes a lot of calculation. Like every move, you need to keep in mind so many things. Like for me, it's not worth it. I prefer to have everything defended. Anyway, um, Sleepy says there's a book by G.M. Rawson on some human aspects. Is that the Chess for Zebras? Maybe. Um, Human aspects of the game, where he strongly argues that stronger players don't calculate deeper, but rather calculate better, more relevant lines. Oh yeah, and that was the question I was trying to address at the first point about depth of calculation. Um, E3 is a one-move blunder, and the depth of calculation is one move. You only need to see a fork. A fork, let's call a fork a basic tactic. So this position is not about depth of calculation. It's about threats. It's just about threats and not paying attention to threats. Now, an intermediate to advanced player, their calculation process involves many aspects. Involves paying attention to threats, like seeing the threats that are in the position. Um, it means coming up with candidate moves, which usually come from the threats. That's one of the guidelines for coming up with candidate moves. Forcing moves is another guideline. Um, and then there are things like defects or problems in the position or weaknesses, like undefended pieces we said already, but there are many others, like pieces with lack of mobility that can be dropped, um, a passed pawn that's near to promoting, that could be another tactical idea, or pieces that are aligned and can be forked, pinned, skewered, etc. Pieces that are aligned in the direction of how a knight jumps, which is a specific kind of geometry that chess players over time get very proficient at seeing. And yeah, all those things, uh, you will start learning them. If you're a total beginner, you will slowly start learning them in a very, very, very conscious way. You will have to think consciously about them, but eventually they will go to your second nature neuropaths. So once you reach certain level, and I think that's probably making you an intermediate player, you can talk really about depth of calculation when you can see 2 3 moves ahead, and maybe more than that, and then also talk about visualization skills and things like that. But at the beginner level, it's mostly threats that you miss. It's mostly about that. It's mostly about seeing threats and exploring basic tactical patterns. Um, and yeah, I agree that stronger players, they calculate less. Like, um, it happened to me so many times. Whenever I play a GM, for example, and let's say I play my best, which sometimes it happens. I play against a GM and I usually feel motivated, so I try my best and I play, the best game ever, and I put all the effort I can because I'm a really hard worker. So I don't know. Last game I played against a GM over the board, I think it was like a 4 hours game, and I gave it all. Like, I calculated like I could never, and I saw a lot of lines, and then I lost, of course. Then we get to the postmortem, and I discuss the positions with the GM, and many lines that I calculated, like I calculated like 5 6 moves line, and on move two, the GM is like, no, like like, and he didn't even calculate the line. He already discarded it. Like, no, no, that's wrong. That's wrong because of this. And that's it. That's the difference, really. It's not about being able to calculate more. In fact, it's about being able to calculate less. That's the thing. Yeah. So definitely agree with that. They calculate better for so many things. All the things I mentioned and many more aspects about calculation, about seeing the threats, and that involves not missing a single threat. It's not just about, oh, I spotted this or I spotted that. When you're proficient, it means that you don't miss a single threat. You look at the board and your mind recognizes all the patterns that it needs to recognize. So when a grandmaster looks at a position, if there's something, they will see it immediately. If there's some important pattern, tactical pattern, and that's it. That's what experience brings you. It's um, and many players think, "Oh, I will never get there." Well, I am not there yet, but I'm getting closer. And people keep getting closer because that's what practice brings. And and the same goes with other things that you already master in your life, like, for example, speaking a language, which by no means is easier than playing chess. Speaking a language, think about all the levels that involves when you're listening to me now, and for some of you, English is not even your native language, as it's not for me either. And you're hearing the sounds and your mind is immediately processing that into language at so many levels, lexic, grammar, yeah, grammar level, semantics, and you're understanding everything. And sometimes you be, even before you end up listening a sentence, you're already formulating an answer in your brain. So it's amazing the speed at which every human being is able to process language, and that's a very complex task, language, in so many levels. And you do it in real time. Why? Because it's second nature to you already. You've learned it for so long, and you've practiced for so much since you were a kid, right? So this is the same in the end. I know when you're a beginner, it doesn't look like it. I know you feel clumsy, but it's the same as when you learn a new language and you feel like, I can't do any, I can't say anything. I keep uh, doing stupid things, and the same goes to chess. It's the same. So yeah, eventually things come like instantly without even thinking about them, and your brain immediately brings this pattern, and that's how uh, maps work, or like a neuron map, that something is triggered and something comes up. You don't make an effort to bring it, and yeah, you'll get there. um, so what makes someone an intermediate player? We talked about a couple things already, but yeah, it's a compendium of things probably. um, oh, the deadly sins of chess. Yeah, I think I heard about that. What do you think is the best way to overcome rating plateau? Is that even indicative of a stagnation in improvement? That's also a very good question. I think, well, rating plateaus can happen at all levels. Hey, Pieri Mosca, thanks for the follow. Welcome. Rating plateaus can happen at all levels, right? And I think whatever I'm gonna say probably doesn't work if you have a rating plateau at 2700. Thanks, DC, for the follow. Like, what I'm gonna say works in general for rating plateaus, but obviously, if you have a rating plateau at 2700, well, guess what? Chances are you may never overcome that one in your life. I mean, I'm not saying I have an answer for everything, and 2700 plateau sounds like a challenge that I will never have to face, fortunately. But uh, for most rating plateaus, the usual advice is try new things. And especially if you consider yourself a beginner or intermediate player, that is, you still have a lot of room for improvement, but you feel that you're at a plateau for a long time, you don't improve. Well, then definitely try new things. If you don't find, if you're like, I keep trying different things and I still don't find a way to improve, um, hire a coach. I mean, or talk to someone who's stronger than you that can give you some insight. A 2700 plateau sounds like a good problem to have. Well, I started the stream talking about that scenario. I think that's the worst problem to have. I think that's like the highest challenge in terms of how to improve in chess, because some people have that challenge and they will never solve it in their lives. I don't know how they can sleep at night, really. Like, I mean, we're very lucky that we're at a point where we have a lot of room to improve, and we know what things we can do to improve. So thankfully we're not there. But yeah, again, if you have a rating plateau, normally the advice is try new things, because in general, when you're, especially if you're a beginner, and every direction you walk, you can improve something. So if whatever you're doing, you don't feel like it's impacting your rating, because that's another thing about impacting your rating. Um, Again, chess is a lot of things, and if you're only focusing on a very narrow set of things, you can be experts on that, and that you can keep improving that, and that may not have an impact in your rating, because you can let's say you study openings, which we already talked about it not being a great idea when you're a beginner. But let's say you're like, no, I want to be an expert in openings, and you keep studying openings. You may be getting better and better and better at those things you're studying. But if you still blunder your pieces after the opening, it will not have an impact in your rating. So definitely at some point, whenever you feel that you're doing efforts and somehow learning things, or you feel like you're making the effort to study things but rating plateau, that means that there's something that's limiting your performance. Because rating, let's not forget about it, rating doesn't measure strength, it measures performance. It measures how do you perform when playing, when competing. And that has nothing to do, well, it correlates, but it's not a direct correlation to what you learn. And sometimes you learn a lot and then the rating is only impacted after after a lot of time after that. Because one thing is learning and a different thing is putting into practice and solving the practical problems that appear when you put into practice. But but yeah, if you feel like you're in a plateau, even despite making efforts and seemingly learning, then it's very likely that there's some other aspects of your game that you're not working on that are actually limiting your improvement. And therefore, I would suggest either trying new things or being more self aware about your challenges and problems. Lucky Basket, welcome. Uh, and or if nothing works, if you don't find the solution, definitely hire a coach or find a friend that's stronger than you and that can maybe give you some insight on what your problem might be. um, okay, next question. Does positional understanding help in quality of calculation? um, Probably that question is not very relevant for beginners, um, because I think the point where positional understanding helps you is beyond that, probably already intermediate slash advanced. So even if I had an answer, which I'm not sure I have, I don't think it's a very relevant question for beginners, because at beginner level, again, what we said about calculation is not about all the aspects of calculation that an experienced player has, but at the beginner level, it's more about the basic things of calculation, like hanging pieces, like not seeing threads, missing threads. And that may seem like, okay, you're exaggerating, you're talking about someone who's only been playing for 2 weeks. No, I tell you, people who have been playing for 2 years, for 4 years, they keep hanging basic tactics. And the reason is the basics of calculations is they miss a thread, they don't pay attention, blah blah blah. And from time to time it happens to me, from time to time it happens to the world champion. It just happens, on a different frequency. It happens once in a blue moon for the world champion, but sometimes you miss something. It's okay, it happens, but it's something definitely to work on before trying to get to more advanced levels. And I think definitely positional understanding is connected to calculation and quality of calculation. And some players may find themselves to understand chess better positionally. And you may have heard that some players are known to be less calculators and more positional, and yet being great players. And I don't know, Karpov comes to mind, uh, but he's really good at calculating. I mean, I I think that's more of a question of style of play. That they've been attributed certain qualities, like, oh no, this player, he plays by concept, he doesn't calculate a thing, but he finds the best engine move every time. I think, as I like to think, as I like to say, you not only have to be good, you also have to play well. And it doesn't matter how much knowledge you have, you still have to put the work and the effort over the board to calculate, because you take the same position and the same idea, the same move, you change the position, a little detail like a pawn here, now it's there, and suddenly the whole evaluation of the move changes. And that happens in chess. That's how complex chess is. And especially in complicated positions, I don't think you can get away without calculating. But of course, if the position is not complicated and it's positional and solid and everything is defended, there are no clear problems, the game is not sharp, then maybe yes. um Magnus having a 2850 plateau, yeah. It used to be 2500 was the high, but it changed with the internet. Why? I don't know what's that referring to. I like how you think suddenly I'm feeling a lot better with my 27 plateau. Yeah, we have a dad joke. Okay. Next question. I really need to do a quick break, and I'll be back to the question: what should you do to minimize blundering of your pieces gradually? Huh. Oh, that's a very nice question. I'll be right back in a minute, though. I need to do one thing. I'll be just right back. Just a minute. Okay, I'm back. So, um, I like that question a lot. What to do to minimize blundering of your pieces gradually? And I think um, different levels of beginners, they have different types of blunders. The way you blunder your pieces is differently. So, for example, how many of you have blundered? Let me put something on the board. Okay, this is going to be a very stupid one, but I've seen who was it? Quartillo did it once. Yeah. Quartillo played this once. So, how many of you have suffered something like this? I don't know. I'm gonna move the king. Yep, I've probably done it, says Robert. Lemon says that gives me PTSD. So, um, this kind of trick, this is just one, right? When they end up taking your rook with that fork on e5, because this open line and you block with g6, then they take your rook. This exact line was in my first chess book. Nice, Sleepy. Yes, it happened. So this type of problem, for example, I see it a lot in beginner games. I see it. I think the most beginners fall for this kind of trick, um, and maybe others like like some knight c7, for example. Maybe some others. Although of course here you would defend. I mean, you would play knight e6, but some beginners completely miss the point and hand the rook like this. In this case, also the king has to move. But um, so this is the kind of super basic. Don't you defend with knight h3? Yeah, you would defend with knight e6 here. Knight e6. Yeah. But some people, I don't. I mean, like in the Jababa London, some people play like c5 and then knight c6, for example, and fall for this, and you have a problem here now for real because knight c7 is coming and you don't have knight e6. So um, yeah, this kind of trick with a fork that grabs a rook. I've shown this example, for example, with a knight on c7, but I've showed the other with a queen to the rook on h8. I saw those tricks a lot on beginner level, and I think at some point they just stop happening. This just don't happen. Uh, I think maybe that's a good definition for intermediate player. Whenever you stop hanging these tricks, but okay, no, that's a bad definition. But what I mean is the different types of tricks are the tricks are different. The types of tricks that you fall for are different. And I see many beginners hanging rooks because in the starting position, if you think about it, and remember the beginner's rule, be mindful of your undefended pieces. Well, guess what? In the starting position, the rooks are not defended. Also, the rooks usually come light to the game. They, because of the way they start in the corners and the way we like to grab the center at the beginning of the game. So the rooks are gonna stay there in the corners for a while, and they're not defended. And so, yes, when I say pay attention to your undefended pieces, well, Ben Feingold rules are pay attention to your undefended pieces in the middle of the board because, of course, in the middle of the board they're more exposed. But also pay attention to your rooks in the opening because in the end there are not a lot of tricks that can happen. I just showed a couple. There are not a lot that can happen. So there are two ways you're gonna learn to avoid them. Um, you either know them, like Sleepy said, It was on my first chess book, so I never hang it. Or you learn them the hard way. You fall for them and then never again. That reminds me of a trick I had. A trick I suffered. Let me try to find. Maybe I have a study on that. I'm not 100% sure. Let me see if I find my game. My studies. Carrero. I remember my opponent, but I was white. No. No, never mind. I don't have the game. Maybe I can try to remember it. Okay, I don't think I will remember it. But it was a Sicilian. I was white. It was uh, the first year I was a chess player. And I just had a great victory. I was 1800 at the moment, 1800 feeder rating. And in this game, I was playing a 1600, somewhat, you know, uh, not not super strong. But in the previous game, I had beaten a 2200 with an amazing win, and I was uh, super confident. And then we played this close Sicilian, and I'm not gonna remember the moves, but it was something like this. And eventually I played with d3, bishop here. My opponent defended probably. Queen d2, bishop g7. Probably something along these lines, and I probably did this. And my opponent probably put the knight there, and I probably played with knight c1, knight d1, this kind of idea to then play c3. But now I don't remember how did this happen. Let me see. I don't know. Let's put. I'm making random moves here. Let's play a6, knight here, is here. Then the knight went away. Castle. No, castle is not the move precisely. Oh, right. So maybe it was not with knight c1. Sorry, 1 second. Yeah, maybe it was not with knight c1. So, hmm, how do I do this? Okay, Joey. Um, yeah, it's hard to come up with. I think in this game I played with queen c1, but I don't. Probably because of knight g4 ideas. So let's say the game went here. I'm not super hungry, but I will be. Yeah. So something like this, and probably because I was concerned about knight g4 instead of queen d2, I went queen c1, trying to prepare this. Something like this. Can't remember exactly. And then knight g4 happened anyway. Can't remember. No, probably knight d4 happened. Sorry about this. Not in this order because the knight is blocking. Yeah, I'm really bad at this. I'm sorry. I need to find a move order in which this works. So let's say we did this first, which makes sense. And now let's imagine black played something. I pushed the knight away. The knight went away. Now I played queen c1. This could be. Knight g4 happened. Bishop d2. I played h3, but it wasn't here. So let's imagine this. This knight is not here. Darn it. My knight is not on f3. Not in the line I'm remembering. I mean, in my defense, this was 2008. Okay, so and it's a game that I never. You're gonna see how painful it was. So you're gonna see I never wanted to look back at it again. So my memory is really bad, but this knight is not here. So maybe yes, it was with the knight on c3 on d1. Okay, so let me go back there. I'm gonna get it right. So let's say it was this knight, this coming here, so queen c1, let's say castle, although I could have taken here. So let's imagine knight d1. I don't know, I'm playing random moves, but it's something like this. Not castle. I don't know, I'm gonna play around. Let's imagine a6 and a4 never happened, but I just put them there. And I don't know what black did here, let's say h6. So what happened in the game was something like this. This was not the position. In fact, probably this knight was traded already or something because I don't remember it. But in the game, what happened with was this. I played h3. My opponent retreated the knight, and I was so happy to push forward with f4, which is obviously a blunder. This was not the exact position, but it was the exact tactic that I had. I just had this fork. Like, um, like it was like obvious on one part, and on the other part, um, I was so surprised that I hung it. like when I saw it on the board, it was a mix of frustration and surprise. Like how did I hand that fork? And of course, this never happened to me before in this opening, and therefore I wasn't even aware of this tactic happening. But it was a shock. Like it was all the circumstances. Like I played c3, I played the queen on c1, I didn't castle, and then in the end I hung a fork on d3. Um, and and this comes to the question. The question was about blunders according to levels and how to prevent them. So this, for example, um, was the hard way. This was one that I learned the hard way because I'm telling you, I never ever in my life hung this fork again on d3, especially not on the closed Sicilian defense, um, because I learned it the hard way. Like it was incredibly painful. It was a long time control. I kept playing the game, a queen down for a piece. I almost drew. It was torture. I lost anyway, and I learned the hard way. And that's, in my opinion, that's the best way to learn. I'm sorry, but but some things, especially those tactics I was mentioning, like the rook in the corner, knight c7 fork, and so on. Those are the kind of tactics that, if you're serious about your own improvement and you analyze your games, um, they're going to be some painful that you will learn them fast, and that's not a problem. That's fine. That's fine. It's fine to make mistakes and learn from them. The problem is when you keep doing them. Then you have a problem. Yeah. Um, but yes, it is true that there are different types of mistakes according to the level, and um, I don't think that again there's a clear agenda or a clear plan of this is the first tactical pattern you should learn, this is the next one, and so on. But in general, you should do tactics. In general, you should do tactics, and one I think one good advice, both for playing chess and for doing tactics, is use a lot of time. Or should I say use more time? If I had to give one advice to beginners, other than self-awareness, analyze your games, write down your thoughts, and so on, the other one would be use as much time as you can. Like, some people, they have busy lives, they can only spend a few minutes a day on chess. Okay, then do what you can. Maybe it's a bullet chess game, or maybe you do a few puzzles, whatever you can. But if you do have time, I would strongly suggest use as much time as you can. And by that, I'm not saying spend 3 hours playing bullet chess. What I'm saying is, if you do have 3 hours, it's better that you spend the 3 hours playing a long game, or playing a long game and analyzing it, than spending 3 hours playing bullet. That's what I mean. Because before you do things fast, you should do things well. And before you do things well, you should do them slow. That's how it goes. Before things are second nature in your brain, you have to put as much attention as you can to them. So I think you learn more, especially when you're a beginner, especially when things are not second nature at all. You learn more from playing slower time controls and from solving tactics slower, like much slower. Forget puzzle rush and all those stupid things you see on the internet. Uh, Take puzzles and use as much time as you need until you worked out all the possibilities. Like, maybe you see a tactical pattern and you think, oh, yeah, it has to be that move. But spend your time, try to see what are the opponent's possible answers, try to see everything. And in your thought process, you will find a lot of things that are wrong, and that's okay. We all make mistakes. Magnus Carlsen makes mistakes. That's fine. And chess players, the better they get, the better they think. We already discussed this, but we all make mistakes, and the good chess player is that only makes the mistakes in their head, but then they do the correct move. But first they do their mistakes in the head, right? Like they think, that's a bad move, that's a bad move. Shredded carrots, welcome. So yeah, being a good chess player is about being able to see why this move is bad, why that move is bad, what's the problem with this, what's the problem with that. Therefore, the solution is this, right? It's not about being a good chess player. Is not about I know everything. Give me a position, and out of the blue, I know what the move is. Although, of course, good players with experience, they develop a lot of intuition, and they have this extra sense where they come up with good moves almost automatically. But in the end, you have to do the work, especially when you have a mess and something to calculate. You have to do the work. Even the best players in the world, they have to do the work out why this works, why this doesn't work. And as a beginner, you should do the same work, just in a much, 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 much slower way, because that's, to your current abilities. But you still have to do it. And if you have to spend 1 hour in one puzzle, my advice, and other coaches will tell opposite, but I will tell you this. My advice is, if you have to spend 1 hour until you figure it all out, you spend it. That's fine. That's fine. Don't look at Hikaru solving the puzzle in 3 seconds and think, oh, I should be able to solve it in 6 seconds. No, that's not how it works. Because right now your brain is going to consider many possibilities that Hikaru's brain is not even considering. You have to do more work. You have to do more work. It's fine. So, so yeah, I don't remember what the question was, but that's it. Filius Orange Juice says, "Hello, how to get more fun from the chess? I don't want to get angry when I lose." Ooh, oh, that's an interesting question, and we get into competition. I can tell you, when I had this fork in this game, I wanted to disappear from the planet. That was like the first feeling. The second feeling was, I'm gonna quit chess. I'm the worst player in the world. I'm gonna quit chess. I'm never gonna play again. And as I said before, on the previous game, I just beat the highest rated player I had ever beaten at that point. And I was like, I'm the best player in the world, right? And that's how it goes. Like, we get too dramatic about this. We have this bias, outcome bias, where, if you win, suddenly you're so good, and if you lose, you're the worst. Especially if you lose to, blundering your queen, as I did here. Now, um, I remember my friend Antonio, because on this game, when I hand this fork, after the game, this friend came to me and told me, because I was like, I'm the worst player in the world, and he said, no, you're not the worst player in the world, but you have a problem. You don't have a method. He told me you should develop a method to play. Like, how do you come up with your moves? How do you analyze your moves? How do you prevent blunders? Do you have a method for that? And I'm like, no, I just, I play. I see a move, I play a move. So yeah, in part he was right. In part, I don't think everybody needs to develop a method necessarily, but yeah, definitely I focused on that after this game, because generally speaking, there's nothing wrong with h3, but sometimes I see players, especially beginners, playing a sequence of moves that lead to disaster. And well, in this position, probably the bishop was not even there, so h3 made more sense than the position that I'm showing. But again, it was like a sequence of moves that practically forced my opponent to deliver the fork, and I just didn't see it coming. Technically, only the last move was the blunder. Obviously, only f4 was the blunder. But sometimes you see them coming, right? And there's this concept that I like to say. When you study endgames with table base, you have two things: distance to mate and distance to zero, depending on whether you're looking how far away are we from the checkmate position, or how far away we're from simplifying to a well-known winning endgame. So those are interesting concepts that you can work with: distance to mate, distance to zero. One that I made up myself and I use with my students is um, distance to error, or distance to failure, or distance to disaster, which means that here my opponent had no threat to win my queen. After I push the knight away, the distance to disaster is one move closer. I'm setting up for disaster, and that may not be relevant to you, because you may think, no, but you blunder on the next move. H3 or not H3 is irrelevant. And I think it is relevant, especially for beginners, because they do this a lot. They do a sequence of moves that, they end up losing a piece or a queen or whatever, and you see that it took a sequence of moves. It was not a one move blunder. It took a sequence of moves to prepare the disaster. And so I think it's important, because it shows the lack of awareness of, in this case, an undefended pawn for one, and also an alignment of pieces, like a complete lack of awareness of problems that I have in my position because I'm playing moves without even caring about this. If I had this position nowadays, well, first of all, the bishop. So I would probably play bishop d2 or castle. But I can see this undefended pawn and I can see this fork here. Like it's obvious to me, right? But at the point, I wasn't even paying attention and it took me playing a sequence of moves to force my opponent to exploit it. So I think for beginners, it's relevant. It's relevant to talk about this concept, at least to make yourself aware that you should pay attention to problems in your position, which again is the most common problem. It's not about depth of calculation. It's not about, oh, when I played h3, I didn't see deep enough. No, it's about missing threads, about missing weaknesses, missing forks. Um, and yeah, connecting to how to get the more fun from the chess and getting angry or not. I got really angry here, but truth is, there's nothing better from a learning point of view than losing. Well, there's sorry. There's something better than losing. Better than losing is losing after playing your best. That's definitely the best. When you lose after playing your best is when you can learn the most. So as long as you make a good effort, then you're gonna learn something. Because even in this game, uh, I don't think I made the best effort, but let's assume I was making the best effort I could, and I still hang a simple tactic. I could still learn from it. It's painful, but I could still learn from it. If you make your best effort and you hang a tactic, then that tells you something about your mind process, right? Which is what my friend suggested. It's uh, my lack of method in this case. Like, you understand the tactic. Once you see it, you understand it. It's not something that that you don't understand. It's not something that you need to learn. Oh, you need to learn this new tactic that you haven't seen before. No, it's not that. But somehow in my games, because of my mind process or the way I play, I hang that. So that tells me something about the process I use to think my moves. And at the moment, for example, I made up a method. I made up a method where I would, especially in long time controls, I would check every time I make a move what, I would, because actually f4 I played it too fast in this game. I really played it too fast. So that's a clear sign of the problem. Um, and many times I found out uh, on my early years as beginner that whenever I thought the problem was calculation, the problem wasn't calculation. Hey Lloyd, thanks for the follow. So I'm going to repeat it again because I think this is important, and this is why I keep suggesting, very important. Hey Chris Benton, welcome. Self-awareness, write down your thoughts after the game. Um, Analyze your games and so on. One of the reasons why this is important is because I found out on my early years as beginner that many times I thought this is the problem and that was not the problem. And nowadays even I look at my analysis of 10 years ago and I read the analysis, and at the moment I said, this was the problem, this was the problem, this was the problem, and now I think those were not the problems. So that's why it's important, because our chess understanding will keep evolving over time, and the way you learn, uh, will affect how you see the game and how you see your own failures. Many times, like in this example, I thought just a miscalculation. I had a blindness. I didn't see that, or I didn't calculate deep enough. And many times the problem was something else that resulted in that. So always ask why, especially when it's a tactical mistake, and especially when you can totally understand the tactic. Right? Once once you see the tactic, you see, oh yeah, that's a fork. I know what a fork is. The question is, why did I miss it on the game? Why did I miss it during the game? And many times it's because, okay, I played too fast. Sometimes it's because I was distracted because of that. I was distracted because of this, and many times our fact, tactical mistakes are occasionated by other problems. Like I would say 99% of the times, and I know it sounds like an exaggeration, but I think 99% of the tactical mistakes when you have a long time control. Okay, in blitz or bullet, well, whatever. Especially if you're a beginner, you'll hang your pieces. It's fine. But if you're playing a long time control, and in my case, I was 1800, as I said, I should not hand this fork. I must not hand this fork. And I must not play a move that forces my opponent to move the piece that that performs the fork. So when I play the fork here, the problem is not a tactical mistake, even if it's a tactical mistake. The problem is something else. Something else must have occasionated this tactical mistake because an 1800 should not play a fork here, right? So the day of the game, I was lucky that my friend was there telling me this, telling me, no, your problem is not a tactical mistake. Your problem is something else. Because you should not be hanging this. So I insist. 99% of the tactical mistakes, or things you think are tactical mistakes, they're occasionated by something else. Um, I remember Gary Kasparov saying tactical mistakes come from bad positions. I like that one a lot because it is true. Sometimes you make tactical mistakes in positions where you have such a bad position that every move looks bad. And then that's fine. But some other times you make a tactical mistake out of the blue, like I did here. Well, then there must be something else. Was this over the board? Yes. Yes, it was over the board. Um, Hello, Lloyd. Thank you. Sorry, I missed that. Sleepy. I suppose Pep is going to say that every opening characterized by a certain pawn structure and piece positions has a set of typical traps, so learning them helps a lot. Correct. Yeah, I was totally gonna say that. Yeah. Yeah, that connects a bit with that question we had at the beginning about whether you should learn many openings as a beginner or just stick to a few. And I said the most normal is you just stick to a few. There's nothing wrong with either way. But openings at the beginner level are more of a discovery tool where you discover ideas. Okay, thanks, Joey. Sounds good. So it's yeah, openings are more of a discovery tool. You discover ideas. But if you go too much into discovering a lot of ideas, then you get overwhelmed because you get all sorts of different tactics, different structures, and it's harder to learn things that you can repeat, right? So yeah, probably will stick to a few, and then once they repeat, you will see certain patterns repeating again, and I tell you, I will never ever in my life fall for this fork again. I very rarely put my queen on c1. Um, anyway, yeah. So that was interesting, and yeah, many times those tactical mistakes come from something else. So yeah, I would insist on that. I think that's an important one for beginners. Keep writing down your thoughts, and And especially if you can, at some point, talk to someone stronger than you, um, that would be really insightful for you. Even though it's going to happen one thing, and it happens a lot, and I see Ben Feingold says this a lot on his classes, is I'm telling you this, and you're going to keep doing that. And it happens to my students as well, is you have your own ideas, and we are all stubborn, we think this way. So when you're told it should be a different way, you're gonna have your brain is gonna resist, and that's normal. But uh, if you're open-minded, you will eventually learn. And it happens to me, and it happens to everybody. Yeah. Is there any set path to get through middle game to end game, or is it completely based on the game at hand? Well, that's a tough one because middle games are the toughest, the most complex part of games. So during the middle game, you cannot rely a lot on memory unless you're experienced. Ta-da! So what does a beginner do in the middle game? Just try to calculate your best. Uh, Middle game is like in the opening, you can rely on your memory of opening theory, but of course it's very limited. In the end game, you can also rely on your memory, but in the middle game, the only memory you're using is tactical patterns memory, because, well, not the only one, but of course if it comes from a certain opening, you have Pong structures in your mind. But again, we're talking about advanced players if we're talking about Pong structures and plans and so on. So for a beginner, the middle game is something you have to cross, and depending of depending on the game at hand, as you say, you should be trying to look for one things or others. If you feel like attacking, you attack. I think at the beginner level, it makes sense to have certain very basic concepts about strategy. For example, um, if you have a space advantage, let me see, what games do I have here? Um, mhm. Yeah, these are not very useful. Um, have too many studies. Okay, maybe here I get an example game. Oh yeah, actually, this first one is an isolated pawn, so that's interesting. Okay, so let's just show this position. I don't need to show the game, but the point is certain strategic concepts can be can be useful because eventually in your games during the middle game, you will see um, things. You will see trade-offs. You will see, oh, I have this advantage, my opponent has that advantage, because that's what chess is about. It's about trading advantages. Hopefully, if you're good enough player, very good player, you will get an advantage out of the opening and be able to transform it until you capitalize it. But that's a dream situation. That's a dream scenario for most of us. But we try our best. So, what guides your play during the middle game, other than calculating? Definitely calculating, but tactics are to the service of strategy. So you try to come up with plans. And plans, the tricky part about plans in chess is they seem like the highest level of strategy, right? The highest level you can think of. It's not technique. It's not knowing how the piece moves and how threads work and so on. it's not the complexities of the tactics, it's beyond that. It's like the highest level is strategy, and you can think of the biggest names in chess as being the greatest strategists in history. However, that's the tricky part. Strategic concepts, they're the easiest to understand. Like, it's super easy to understand. uh, we all know what an open file is. We all know what a weak pawn is, maybe what an isolated pawn is, right? We all know what does it mean to have an exposed king. Like, all those concepts are easy to understand, but very hard to work with. Or when you see strong players working with them, it all seems so easy to understand. Oh yeah, oh, I can do that, but then you can't. It's like when you see soccer on the TV and everybody understands what the players are doing, but we can't do it. So the complexity of tactics, that's where a grandmaster can see something completely different than you're seeing in the specifics of the calculation. But then when you try to explain the games, the moves, and the strategy at a strategical level, it's like, oh yeah, there was this problem in black's position and white exploited it like this, and right, the strategy sounds like, but still, those guidelines can help you to understand what to do. And if you think about it, um, in your way from the opening to the end game, um, what happens are trades, basically. That's how you get from an opening to an end game. Pieces get traded, pieces and pawns. So trades are the most important strategical decision, because whenever you trade something, it can be trading pawns, and that changes the pawn structure. So lines get opened, things can happen, um, because pieces can use those lines, or pieces get traded, and sometimes it's on a quid pro quo simple trade, like a knight for a knight or a bishop of certain color for a bishop of the same color. But sometimes imbalances are created with the trades, a bishop for a knight, bishops of opposite colors, and those are strategical decisions. When to do trades, which kind of trades, and those are not simple questions. And we're talking already, I think, intermediate slash advanced players when we're talking about using this kind of trades in your favor. But that doesn't mean that you can't have, as a beginner, certain understanding of basics of strategy and trades. And for example, and this is what I wanted to show with this position, I'm not going to explain all of the things about having an isolated pawn, because I don't think that's relevant for beginners. But we can see already, I think, we can see that in this position white has, okay, beginners in the chat, please, what does white have? What are the strategic advantages and or disadvantages of white in this position? This is a test. Space, says Lloyd. And Jomba says development. And Lemon says pinning the knight. And for new messages, sorry. And Joey says white has a panache. What is that? More developed pieces and castle king. Yeah, so you're all very good players, right? Um, okay, Lemon is right. Lemon is right. The knight is pinned. But probably that would be the least important things of all the things that were said in the chat. Strategically speaking, strategically speaking, white has a space and development, and that has been said in the chat. Development in terms of number of pieces out, but also in terms of castle king, because black is a certain number of moves away from castling. So definitely white has space and development. and that is a recipe. So these kind of easy recipes could help you a lot if you're a beginner and try to think about what to do in the middle game. Of course, then you have to calculate, but there are simple recipes. Like, for example, if you have a space and advantage, attack. You should attack because, yeah, you should attack. Like, having the space favors the attack. And another thing that favors the attack is having a lot of pieces. And so if you have a space, you should avoid trades, for example. That's this kind of simple rules. They're actually easy to understand, but I don't know why people don't use them more often when they're beginners, because they're not so complicated. If you have a space, you should be attacking. If you want to attack, you should be preserving the pieces. Black doesn't have space. Pieces are hitting each other. That's inconvenient. Therefore, black should be aiming to trade pieces to release their problems. So those are kind of very basic notions of strategy that I think as a beginner you can already have. I'm not saying you can navigate middle games easily. I don't think any advanced player can say they navigate middle games easily. I think every game you have to work your tactics and calculate. But certain things can guide you on at least what you should be trying to do. Like, I should be trying to attack, I should be trying to preserve pieces, I should be trying to trade pieces, things like that. Rempu says, one thing I really noticed as a beginner player is games when I didn't prioritize king's safety, I got punished in the opening middle game. Yeah, we talked about openings, but we didn't talk about opening principles, right? And beginners, they blunder pieces in the opening, but they also make some stupid things in the opening, like pushing too many pawns that is not developing any piece, bringing the queen out instead of pieces, not castling. All those things, like, we didn't go into opening principles, but I mean, yeah, we should have said those. So yeah, good one, Rempu, because yeah, that's true. And actually, I have a friend. I played with him today this match, who usually delays castling too much. Actually, he didn't castle. I played 2 games. I beat him twice today, and he didn't castle. G's outs. I never miss forks. Yeah. So for example, in this game, I kept attacking, and I tried to preserve pieces and so on, and I ended up winning. This was an attacking game. Yeah. You're like, attack, nah, leave my king in the middle, then you're like, oh no. Could we see the game? This may not be the best for beginners, this game, but yeah, we can see the game. Actually, let me walk through it. I have many games, and maybe there are others that could potentially be more interesting for beginners. But yeah, we can learn from any game. So this is a funny line against the French defense, but we're not gonna talk about openings too much. This game, I think I was like 1900 and my opponent was like 2000. It was over the board, and I play queen e2, which is a very fine line. C5 is normal. All of this is normal from both sides, except maybe knight g7. Here, I think black should play d5. I tend to be an e45 player at the moment and tend to stick to similar openings. So yeah, the queen e2 line against the French, it's not super bad. It's not a bad opening, okay? But it's not something that you should be teaching to beginners, probably. So that's the one. But okay, what's on the way? Yay! But anyway, if any of you, why d5? Okay, so I didn't want to talk about the opening, but I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it because if you want to play against the French defense, which is obviously this, and let's say you want to prepare some funny lines, well, queen e2 is a funny line, but it relies on you being a good player already. So again, not for beginners. B3 is another funny line that I like to play. But one point of Queen E2 is basically the only legal move. The only legal move that prevents 2 d5. Because now if black plays d5, which black plays usually against anything in the French, against any move you play here, black will play d5 next. Except Queen E2. Because if d5, well, now the queen is pinning the pawn. and black needs to take with the queen. And black gets like a bad version of the Scandinavian defense. So yeah. So that's the main or the main idea of d5. But black wants to play d5 sooner or later. And c5 is a good move because it prevents d4. Because white, obviously queen e2 is not a great move. It blocks the pieces. We want the queen out of there. So we prepare d4. Pepe punishing the pre-move. Yeah, and this was a classical chess game over the board. So I punished the pre-move. Okay, and now c3, and with this, white is so ready to play d4 anyway. We're trying to play d4, and the only way black really can prevent it is go d5 now. D5 now that c3 has been played, because now we don't mind taking with the queen because there's no knight c3. So yeah, little subtleties here and there. And if black does not play with d5, then we're gonna play with d4, which is what happened in the game. Knight g7 is one of the normal attempts that black has to prepare d5, which is I'm pinning this pawn. But now I play d4, and so we get this position: takes, d4, and just a normal position, except I have the queen on e2. And now it depends pretty much on what happens here. If black releases the pressure with d takes e4, then we're happy to take with the queen because now there's no longer knight f6. And that's what happened in the game actually. But if black doesn't, we may eventually block or not. For now I don't want to block because I'm trying to prevent knight f5. And so this bishop is ugly. And if I have enough time, like for example if the center gets blocked, then I may play with g3, bishop d2 and castle. If I don't, if this pressure is still here and dangers and so on, I may just play queen c2 to bring the bishop out. But in this case my opponent made my life easier because he took on e4. So queen takes, and yeah, my opponent was trying to prove a point that he's playing against an isolated queen's pawn, which is true. And you know, one of the typical strategies, this is more for intermediate players maybe, is to block the pawn. And so my opponent tried to do that, but he was a bit concerned with something on b5, so a6 first, brought the bishop out, knight b4, I castled, he blocked, but he spent he's paid a few tempi doing so. So there's my lead in development, and this is the position I was showing you. So I have a lead in development. My opponent played many moves with the same piece, trying to block the isolated pawn, but I brought the pieces out. Okay, I don't have a clear attack yet, but I connected the rooks and the position looks great. So now it's about attacking. And knight f6. Knight f6. Knight f6. Now, a very interesting moment, strategically speaking. Because what would a beginner think and what did I think? Because I don't consider myself a beginner anymore in this game, but I was definitely much less experienced than nowadays. Nowadays I would have done the same I did, just spending much less time. Take and double the pawns. My queen is under attack. Yeah, yeah, true. Beginners would think, okay, my queen is under attack, I can take and double pawns, right? Beginner would play h3. Right. Okay. No, we're talking good beginners. Good beginners. Beginners who don't hang queens. So yeah, you would think, okay, I take and ruin the pawn structure, or I move my queen somewhere. I can put the queen on h4, I can put the queen on a4, I can put the queen on e3, I can put the queen on 3, c2, e2, so on. Right? It all makes sense. Maybe some beginner would think, oh no, bishop e5 check because Pepe always tells me look at all the checks in the position. Maybe. Now, move the queen to e5. I missed that one. Thank you, Lemon. Remember when I said about stronger players, GMs who directly discard certain moves and they don't even think about them? I didn't even think about e5 because I don't know what the queen is doing on e5. But okay, yeah, queen e5 is a move. Um, Beginner player gets back rank mate. What's a luft? Okay. So, in, I think this is an interesting moment because what I thought there, what a beginner thinks, what I thought, and what I think now are different things. So, different points in the learning path. So, what I thought at the moment, as let's say intermediate mind, was my opponent just played knight b8 from b8 to c6, from c6 to b4, from b4 to d5, from d5 to f6 to let me take that knight. So, okay, and let me ruin the pawn structure. Moreover, I thought if I take, I not only ruin the pawn structure, I can keep the attack with d5, open everything up. So it's not just bishop takes f6, what I'm thinking. What I'm thinking is a bit deeper than that. Is bishop takes f6, d5. If they open they can't take probably because of knight takes. And if they push, I may have knight takes e5. Sacrifice. There's a pawn on f6. And I was thinking already attacking ideas, like sacrificial attacking ideas. And that's connected with attacking. So my question here, my strategical question, I think the strategical question for a beginner would be, should I take on f6 or move the queen? My strategical question as an intermediate player was, it's the same, but it's formulated differently. It's, should I start an attack with bishop takes f6 and d5 or not? That's the question. So it's deeper than that, and it's using a bit more strategical knowledge than that. And hey, Bazinga, and by the things we're saying about my opponent spending so many tempi and two moves is not deep enough. Right. I mean, what I was seeing is obviously bishop takes, g takes, d5, e5, knight takes, and for example, after pawn takes, queen takes obviously, but after f5 or bishop f5, I was considering d6, queen sacrifice with checkmate on f7. So the lines went deeper, definitely. But the point I'm trying to make, and that's one of the main mistakes I did as a beginner, and I did it on this game, by the way, because I wasn't advanced enough, and I don't do that anymore, is before I go too deep in the calculations, I think about what's on the table. What are the options? What can possibly? And I don't burn all of my time calculating interesting lines only because they're interesting or they look interesting. But rather I think, first of all, what are the possible paths here? It's either I move the queen, and I have pretty interesting squares for the queen to go to and remain active and remain having all the advantages I already had because my opponent didn't do precisely a developing move on the last move. Or I can go for the attack already. That's the strategical option I have. And if I go for the attack immediately, I need to calculate it, and probably the decision will rely on the result of that calculation because it's very concrete. Now, what is the strategical risk? And that's something that I think a beginner doesn't think, probably. And for me, it was my biggest, like the incredibly biggest concern when I was calculating this is, am I trading down too much? Even though I'm only trading a piece, I'm giving away the bishop pair. I'm giving away the bishop pair in a position where I want to attack, because I only play bishop takes f6 to start an attack. But I'm giving away the bishop pair and trading down some pieces when what I want to do is not trading pieces. I want to keep pieces, especially the bishop pair, right? So it was a bit of a strategical struggle for me at the moment. Always in the back of my mind while I was calculating. Chedoku, thanks for the follow. So, for example, in this position, the calculations were very concrete, and actually I ended up taking. But if the outcome wasn't that clear, I wouldn't have gone for it. Curious to see the stockfish evaluation. I don't know. I think bishop takes f6 is a good move. We can ask stockfish, but Run J Run, hey, thanks for the follow. Yeah, it's very tight between bishop takes f6 and queen e2 right now. Bishop takes f6, best move. Yeah. No, it is a good move. But yeah, I just wanted to mention this kind of struggle that at the point I play queen e2 rather quickly, honestly. Yeah, exactly. It has to do a bit with also with practical play. I don't regret what I did in the game, and actually it ended up being a good game and a very nice game, and I enjoyed it a lot. But nowadays, I think I would play queen e2 also, and and instantly, rather quickly, as Sleepy is saying, because uh, it has to do with practical play. At the moment, I wasn't very practical, and the same way I decided to, um, the same way I calculated lines and burned my time calculating lines only because they looked interesting. Um, I also took some decisions that were not very practical, and nowadays I'm much more practical than that. If I can still keep all the advantages and waste no time, why wouldn't I? Right? If I can just keep all the advantages I had, my opponent just played a move that's not developing at all. If I can just keep all the advantages I have and take it from there without spending a minute on the clock, why wouldn't I, right? That's what I would do nowadays. But at the moment, I was like, no, I've given an option here. I have to calculate it all down to the end. And I don't regret it. I think it's also an interesting approach. It's just not my style anymore. Um, so yeah, ended up calculating that and ended up going for it. And when I calculated, see the difference between beginner, which thinks I'm doubling pawns and that's end of the story, and what my real concerns were in the game. First of all, whether I had an attack, and I calculated a long line, by the way, from this point, but also I considered what I'm giving the opponent. That's something beginners usually don't consider. Okay, so yeah, just saying. Are you helping him develop? Yeah, exactly. Uh, the only justification for this frontal attack I'm doing is my calculation showed that I had a strong attack and I wanted it to succeed. But it was very, very close to not working. The pawn f6 is not too bad. Yeah, so the only reason this works is because I have d5, although the engine prefers rook a d1 first. But it took definitely calculation. And the only reason this is not great for black, the only reason, and that's the only reason why I took the knight on f6, is because here I have the sacrifice knight takes e5. Otherwise, all of this is helping black. So very importantly, I calculated everything. And I was aware of all the risks that I was taking because, of course, rook g8, bishop h3, for example. I mean, I'm opening a lot of lines for my opponent as well. So yeah, I don't regret the decision, and I think it ended up being a nice game that I really enjoyed a lot because when you have a game, an attacking game, especially classical over the board chess, I don't know about you guys. I think very few things in life are more enjoyable than that. And knowing you have an advantage, not in this position, a few moves later, okay? Knowing you have an advantage and you're attacking, and having to use your time not to find how to defend, but rather to find how to finish your opponent and trying to be precise and work it out. I don't know. I enjoy that. So I don't regret that decision because that led there, but I wouldn't do it today. Anyway, FTX c5 happened. Uh, Queen takes with a tempo, although rook g8, and here d6. And I'm regaining the piece. Also, I have an attack. Lloyd, thanks for the follow. I mean, not the follow. Thanks for the subscription. I appreciate the support. And I'm going to remind you all the reason we're doing this session today is because yesterday Lemon subscribed and proposed this topic, which is a very interesting topic. And so, Lloyd, if you want to propose a topic, that's a perk you have as a subscriber, and I'll do my best. Food is here, so I'm gonna finish soon today. But if you're interested in this topic, I may collect my thoughts and maybe do a second part of it. We kind of moved into showing a game. I'm not sure why, because I don't think this is precisely beginner level, but at least it shows. I'm trying to show. Oh, John Bass also. Thank you so much, guys. We have a hype train. Wow. Yeah, at least I'm trying to show how I thought at the moment. I'm considering myself an intermediate player at the moment, and how how I would do it nowadays differently. Anyway, let me finish this quick and. Thanks for the follow as well, John Bass. Lloyd says I've learned more hearing a few minutes than hours on other streams. Thank you. That's so cool. And did I miss something else in the chat? Fred, hey, thanks for the follow. Crashing someone in a long endgame that is better for you the whole time is my favorite. Yeah, definitely. But at the time, that's one thing I didn't say earlier when I talked about the way we go from an opening to an endgame is trading pieces. We left aside the case where you checkmate your opponent and you don't get to an endgame. Of course, many people try that, especially beginners. They don't like endgames, so they want to end the game sooner. And that's what I'm trying to do here in this game, right? I'm trying to kill my opponent. Look at that king. And at the very least, I'm regaining the piece. So that was comforting. Even though my opponent played a very bad move here, rook g6. I remember there was something that we both missed here, but I can't remember what was it. I calculated the lines with bishop h3, and I was confident, but I'm not gonna show lines here. Just show how the game went, and get to another interesting, very interesting point, which is after rook g6 takes, queen takes e7. Very, very correct from my opponent's point of view, taking with the queen. Why? Because again, we're attacking. My biggest concern is I'm trading too much. The space advantage is gone. I gave some development back, not all of it, because my pieces are out and my opponent's pieces are very close to being developed, but not quite yet. But the most important factor right now, probably the only important factor that makes me want to keep attacking and to attack, the king in the center. That's it. And well, of course, my piece is coming, and the line's open, so it looks very, very dangerous for black. Now, black is offering a queen trade, because if we trade queens, our attack, suffers a lot, right? An attack, if you have an attack, it's going to be much, much, much stronger with queens on the board than without queens on the board. Okay, so my opponent wants to trade queens because then if his king stops being in danger, then suddenly who has the activity? With the rook already on the g file, the bishop's coming, the bishop pair on an open position. If I give my opponent time enough to bring the other rook in the game, I may be actually on my back foot here. So queen trade offer, obviously. And here, this is a position that I put to my students sometimes as a tactical exercise. Um, so I'm not gonna do it with you because I really want to finish soon. Queen h8 has been suggested. That was one of my candidate moves. This is a nice exercise of candidate moves and calculation. In the game, I spent 30 minutes on this move. And funnily enough, nowadays I would also spend a lot. Maybe I would calculate faster and I wouldn't spend like 30 minutes, but I would still spend a lot because I think it's a very critical moment. And if we're not precise here, our attack may not get it, may not get there, and then we're actually maybe not uh, still on a good position. So here my candidate moves. The reason I calculated a lot is because there were many candidate moves, and I want, generally speaking, to keep attacking, stop my opponent from attacking me, and preserve queens. And I want to calculate all the options and see which one keeps the attack the strongest, and so on. So queen h8 was one of the candidate moves. So was queen h5, queen a5, queen f4, queen d4. Um, I think that's it for the queen moves, unless I'm missing something. Queen d5, yeah. And I also considered any rook to e1. I also consider that because I also consider, okay, maybe because all of these moves of moving the queens somewhere, they were all like, okay, I'm just spending a move, moving the queen to avoid the queen trade, so my opponent has a move like bishop f3, bishop h3, or whatever, or queen g5, and so it was like, okay, I'm spending a move, and maybe it's too slow, so maybe instead I just go for the queen trade. I go rook e1, and if my opponent trades queens, at least I bring another rook in the attack. I'm ready to double rooks and so on. So definitely rook fe1 and rook ae1 were candidate moves. So I calculated all of those deep. Okay, every move had problems. Like queen h8, my queen could get trapped actually with rook g7. Queen d4 had a couple problems. One of them was rook g4, I think. And yeah, in the end, queen a5 was the selected move, and it's the best move. And the line that I actually found more interesting to calculate, the one I like the most of all the I calculated many lines, okay? But the one I like the most, because it took me a while to figure out what to do against b6. There are other moves here, okay, that I calculated, but exactly Paradash, because of bishop b5. The moment I saw that I could answer b6 with bishop b5 is when I saw the line worked. So yeah, not something you calculate out of the blue, definitely. Basically, calculation is much easier and efficient when you clearly understand the strategic battle with plans for both sides and concrete ideas like bishop h3 and queen g5. Yes, agree. And here there are still some lines to go from this position, because after king d8 or bishop d7, bishop takes d7, and if king d8, rook d1. Well, there's still lines. I worked out the lines, and I saw that bishop b5 was working, so that was a nice find. So in the game after queen a5, my opponent did also a very understandable decision, which is to try for a queen trade again with queen g5, trying the queen trade, threatening mate. So queen trade is probably forced, but now it's under my terms, because now I had rook fe1 check, bishop e7, and I could use the ping of the bishop. My opponent didn't have a better move, had to play bishop e7. So this was part of my calculation. Queen takes g5, rook takes g5, and knight e5. Yeah. and I'm winning an exchange here actually. So um, yeah, was really proud at the moment of the game, and I really enjoyed it. But again, nowadays, when your opponent is making bad moves, sometimes you don't need to go for the kill. In fact, in this game, it was very close to not working. It was like by a very narrow margin that the attack went through all the way, and I had to be accurate through it. So nowadays I would be like, no, you're creating problems in your position. Let's keep enjoying the space, and I don't need to be so concrete. So mixed feelings about this game. In fact, um, Rook b5 to avoid bishop b5. I'm not sure at which point. Luis Gab, hey, thanks for the follow. Maybe you mean Rook g5. Maybe you mean Rook g5 here. But I don't think it avoids bishop b5. But I don't remember what I calculated here. I don't remember if it's 95 or bishop b5. I don't remember. I would need to calculate again. Yeah. So this could be a nice exercise for another day. Um, then this was a very interesting moment also after bishop e6. I have a pleasant choice here. One option is knight c7 check, and the other is the way I did it. Is I sack the exchange, but I take a free rook. And the reason I saw this was working is because it seems as if king c6 will trap my knight. It seems that way. My opponent did not play king c6, but it was a very nice find, a very nice geometrical pattern to see that if my opponent tries that to trap my knight and then eventually go after it, I can put my bishop on f3 and my knight is saved. Because let's put it on the board. This did not happen. He didn't play king c6, but my point is this check would collect b7. The king can't keep b7 and so on. And if b5, bishop f3 saves the knight anyway. So that's why I went for rook takes c6. And again, when you're calculating, a beginner sees one move ahead and sees, oh, I double pawns, or I take this, or I take that. But when you're a more advanced player, you're always looking at consequences and looking at the problems you cause in the position. And here, the problem of this line, rook takes and knight c7, my only concern is maybe the knight gets trapped. Once I work out that the knight doesn't get trapped, perfect. And well, the rest of the game is not very relevant, although I was annoyingly precise for the rest of the game and I collected everything. Yeah. And now the final blunder, b5. Check and knight here. Yeah. And here black resign. So yeah, okay, this we discussed many things that were not maybe a bit beyond, maybe they were a bit beyond the topic. I'm gonna leave it here. If you're interested, I may do a second part, maybe collecting my thoughts so I can show something. Maybe last but not least, I remember, because we're talking about how to improve in chess if you're a beginner. Final answer. I have been asked this so many times that I have it written down. So I'm gonna read it to you, because sometimes, let me see, chess, fuck. So many times people only chess send me a private message. Hey Pepe, how do I improve in chess? I'm a beginner. And other questions, as you can tell here. So I keep collecting because I keep answering. So instead of rewriting them each time. I kept collecting some of the most frequently asked questions, and one of them is how to improve. So I have it here. Let me read it for you before I leave. And this is my final answer. This is what I wrote maybe a couple years ago. My thoughts about how to improve. This is what I answer to a random stranger that asks me about how to improve in chess. And this is maybe a simplified version of what we've done on the stream today, and what we can do on a second part maybe. Thanks, Lemon. I'm glad it was helpful, because sometimes when I do a lot of talking and I don't show a lot of positions on the board, I feel like I'm talking too much, and I don't know how useful that can be. But I'm glad it is. So let me read this, and with this, I will end the stream. How to improve? There's no easy answer to this question, because every player is different with their strengths and weaknesses. But thankfully, chess is so wide and complex that I think every aspect of it that you decide to work on, you'll get some improvement. That being said, it's usually recommended for players that are not so strong yet, let's say under 2000 feet elo, to focus on tactics and endgames. Again, any other aspect of chess that you might be interested to work on, such as openings, as long as you enjoy it, there's nothing wrong about training it, but the impact of it in games and results will not be as strong as the case of tactics and endgames. I'm not so sure about endgames. Maybe what I said earlier on the stream, more about practical endgames, maybe if you're a beginner, than theoretical endgames. When will I start stream tomorrow? Tomorrow we have the Rapid League, no, sorry, the Bundesliga. So that will be 1 hour earlier than usual. That will be 1 p.m. Central Daylight Time. That's 8 p.m. Central European Time. Tactics and endgames are the fastest way to increase your understanding of the game. Agreed. How to train tactics? Puzzles. Lichess is good enough for that. And here's the link. Other sites, chess24, chess.com, chess tempo, also. By the way, maybe on a second part for this topic, we could talk about tools that you can use, websites and other tools. That could be interesting, maybe. Um, the important thing is to do it often. Yeah. It's like learning to play an instrument or talk a new language. If you do it on a daily basis, even if it's a small amount per day, you'll get to a point where most ideas will come naturally to your mind, the same way the hand of a pianist predicts the next chord in a song without having to think. Daily training, no matter how small it is how you grow intuition. How to study endgames? Many endgames, you can solve them over the board during a game. The problem, that is true by the way, endgames are a simplified version of chess. So the calculation of an endgame can be easier than the calculation of any middle game or opening. However, as I say here, the problem is that you usually reach the endgame tired, and in a game you need to calculate not just one endgame, but all the endgames arising from a certain position. Also, the endgame is the part of the game that has the more direct impact in the result of the game. Also, many endgames tend to repeat. Because of all of that, studying endgames is of vital importance to improve your scores. Anyone can study endgames on their own, because as pointed out, you can actually solve most of them without help. We have databases also. They involve few pieces, so you can calculate most of it, even long lines. Nowadays, we have engines to practice playing against, and table bases on Lichess analysis board, for example, which can tell you the evaluation and best moves in a specific endgame position. There's nothing like working on a position to understand it and learn it. However, because it's hard to learn things that we ignored that we don't know, it's very helpful to have help from other people who already studied. That can be in the form of study material, book, video, chess study, etc., or a person, coach, or chess buddy who can guide you. Okay, that's my complete answer. Hope it helps. And answering what has been asked in the chat, Lemon says this could be like a series every now and then. Sounds like a good idea. Basinga says new YouTube series. Sounds like a good idea. Yeah, why not? And now I have to go eat my food before my wife takes it. I got a warning already in the chat, so I gotta go, guys. Thanks for watching. Does watching good players help beginners improve? Yes, surprisingly, yes. Um, I'll talk about it some other day. Because I always believed active effort, like you should work on your own, but sometimes watching you can also get some good things. Anyway, thank you everybody. I'm really leaving